The storm outside roared like a monster, thunder rattling the windows of St. Mary's Private Hospital in New York. Inside the maternity ward, a young woman fought for her life. Her name was Sophia Turner, 27 years old, fragile yet brave, clutching the sheets as waves of pain tore through her body. Sweat soaked her hair, her lips trembled, and her breathing came in desperate gasps. "Push, Sophia, push. We can see the baby's head," the doctor urged, his gloves already drenched in crimson. Sophia screamed, her voice breaking through the sterile silence, and with one final desperate push, the first child slid into the world, crying loudly. A brief flicker of joy crossed her pale face. "My baby, my little one," she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. But the moment of relief shattered instantly. Blood poured out of her body in terrifying waves, soaking the white sheets, dripping onto the cold floor. The doctor's voice sharpened with panic. "She's hemorrhaging! Get more blood units in here now!" The nurses rushed, their hands shaking, pressing gauze, adjusting IVs, calling out numbers. The smell of blood mixed with disinfectant filled the room. Sophia's vision blurred, her body trembling as her strength drained away. Her heart screamed not for herself, but for the second child still inside her womb. Then the door creaked open. David Miller, her husband, walked in with a smirk. Not fear, not concern, but arrogance twisted his face. His expensive suit was untouched by rain, his eyes cold and distant. "Look at this mess," he scoffed, folding his arms as he watched the blood spread like a cruel painting. "And you expect me to believe those children are mine? Don't make me laugh, Sophia." The words sliced through her like knives. Tears blurred her eyes, not from pain of the body, but from pain of the heart. She reached a trembling hand toward him. "David, why would you say that? These are your children, ours." He chuckled bitterly, shaking his head. "You think I don't know? You think I haven't seen the way my father looks at you? Don't lie to me, Sophia. Those babies, they're probably his." The room fell into stunned silence. The nurses exchanged horrified glances, unable to believe what they were hearing. The doctor muttered, "She's losing too much blood," but David stood unmoved, his smirk widening. Sophia's chest heaved, her heart breaking into pieces. Even on the edge of death, her husband was laughing at her pain, accusing her of betraying him with his own father. Her lips quivered as she whispered, "David, you're wrong. Please, believe me." Her eyes rolled back for a moment as another wave of blood poured out. The monitors beeped frantically, red numbers flashing warnings. The second baby still had not arrived, and Sophia's life hung by a fragile thread. And in that instant, as her world collapsed and David's cruel laughter echoed in the room, the door burst open again, and a commanding voice thundered. But who had come, and what truth were they carrying in their hands? Before the stormy night in the hospital, before the cries of newborns and the cruel laughter of her husband, Sophia Turner lived a quiet and humble life. She had grown up in a small town in Ohio, raised by a single mother who worked 2 jobs just to put food on the table. Sophia never had luxury, never tasted the sweetness of wealth. What she did have was kindness, resilience, and a heart that longed for love. At 21, she left her hometown to study nursing in New York City. She wanted to help people, to be a light in their darkest hours. While her classmates dreamt of glamorous careers or wealthy husbands, Sophia found joy in caring for the sick, holding the hands of patients who had no one else. Her smile was gentle, her voice soft, and everyone around her admired the warmth she carried. It was during her internship at St. Mary's Hospital that she first met David Miller. He was tall, confident, and carried himself with the arrogance of someone born into privilege. His family owned one of the largest real estate empires in New York. To Sophia, he seemed untouchable, like a star in another sky. Yet one evening, when she stayed late after a long shift, he appeared with flowers and that dazzling smile. "Miss Turner, you work too hard," he teased. "You should let someone take care of you for a change." Sophia blushed, never imagining that someone like David would notice her. He pursued her relentlessly, showering her with attention, expensive dinners, and promises of forever. Against her mother's cautious warnings, Sophia fell deeply in love. She believed she had finally found the family she always dreamed of. Their wedding was like a fairy tale, held in a grand hall with crystal chandeliers and endless champagne. Sophia, in her simple yet elegant gown, walked down the aisle feeling like the luckiest woman alive. She whispered vows through tears, promising to stand by David in sickness and health, in wealth and in poverty. At that moment, she never doubted his love. But soon after the honeymoon glow faded, cracks began to show. David grew distant, distracted by late-night business meetings and unexplained absences. When Sophia told him she was pregnant, twins, no less, he forced a smile that never reached his eyes. The warmth she once knew vanished. He stopped coming home for dinner, stopped holding her hand, and started accusing her of things she could not comprehend. "Are you sure they're mine, Sophia?" he asked one night, his voice sharp as a blade. Her heart sank. She laughed nervously, thinking it was a cruel joke. But his eyes were dead serious. From that night on, the man she loved became a stranger. Sophia carried her pregnancy alone, her health weakening as months passed. Every ultrasound, every kick from her babies, she faced with a mixture of joy and fear. Deep inside, she prayed that David would come back to her, that he would see the truth. But instead, he slipped further away, lost in his suspicions and secrets. And as her due date approached, Sophia sensed that her battle would not only be against the dangers of childbirth, but also against the man who once promised to love her forever. What could have poisoned David's heart so deeply, turning love into suspicion and cruelty? The Miller family name was spoken with both admiration and envy across New York City. For decades, they had ruled the skyline with their towering glass buildings, luxury apartments, and sprawling real estate ventures. At the head of it all was Richard Miller, David's father, a man whose stern reputation commanded respect in boardrooms and charity galas alike. To outsiders, the Millers embodied the perfect American dream: wealth, power, and influence woven into every fiber of their lives. But behind the shimmering facade lay suffocating expectations, rigid traditions, and a ruthless hunger for control. David had grown up under the shadow of his father's success, never praised for his own efforts, always measured against impossible standards. "Someday all of this will be yours," Richard would say, pointing at the city's skyline from their penthouse balcony, "but you must prove yourself worthy." Those words shaped David into a man desperate to please, desperate to be seen as strong. Yet no matter what he achieved, Richard remained distant, offering criticism instead of approval. David's heart hardened over the years, craving validation that never came. When he introduced Sophia to the family, the reaction was far from warm. Richard studied her with his calculating eyes, the way a businessman evaluates a risky investment. She was beautiful, yes, and kind, but she was also ordinary, a nurse from Ohio, without money, without connections. "You could have chosen anyone," Richard muttered to David after their first dinner together. "Why her?" David clenched his jaw but said nothing. He had loved Sophia then, fiercely, defiantly. Yet deep inside, his father's words planted seeds of doubt. Could a woman like Sophia truly belong in their world of glittering wealth and unspoken rules? The Miller family gatherings were an endless parade of status and appearances. Socialites in diamonds, businessmen boasting of profits, women whispering behind champagne glasses. Sophia felt out of place, like a guest who had wandered into the wrong party. She smiled politely, endured the sideways glances, and told herself that love would be enough to bridge the gap between her humble roots and David's empire. But love, in the Miller household, was often smothered by suspicion and pride. Rumors began to swirl, tiny whispers at first, then louder. A maid mentioned that Richard had been unusually kind to Sophia during one gala, offering her his arm when she tripped. A distant cousin joked that Sophia resembled a younger version of Richard's late wife. Those words, careless and cruel, reached David's ears like poison. "Do you see how people talk?" David snapped at Sophia one night, his face red with anger. "They think my father has feelings for you." Sophia's heart shattered. She had never looked at Richard as anything other than a father figure, the powerful man who intimidated her more than anyone. But David's insecurities, fueled by years of craving his father's approval, twisted those whispers into daggers. And so, the man who once swore to protect her began to doubt her, to see her as a threat instead of a partner. Sophia could feel the walls closing in, the crushing weight of a world she could never fully belong to. And as the Millers tightened their grip on appearances, David's love for her was slipping into something far more dangerous: resentment. Before suspicions, before betrayals, and before the cold stares at family dinners, there had been a time when Sophia and David's love felt pure, magical, and unbreakable. It was a chapter she often replayed in her mind when nights grew heavy, the kind of memory that kept her heart alive even as everything around her began to fall apart. It all started at St. Mary's Hospital. Sophia was working a late shift, exhausted after tending to patients for 12 straight hours. Her feet ached, her uniform smelled faintly of antiseptic, and her hair was tied up in a messy bun. She was scrubbing equipment in the quiet of the ward when David appeared, holding a bouquet of fresh roses. "Don't nurses ever sleep?" he teased, his smile lighting up the dim corridor. Sophia blinked in surprise. Men like David, polished, confident, surrounded by privilege, didn't usually notice women like her. Yet here he was, leaning casually against the wall, looking at her as if she were the only person in the world. That night, he walked her home. The city lights sparkled above them, and the air smelled faintly of rain. They talked for hours, about her childhood in Ohio, his struggles living under his father's shadow, their shared dreams of building something meaningful. David listened intently, not as the heir to a fortune, but as a man genuinely curious about the woman beside him. From then on, their love blossomed quickly. David would surprise her at work with coffee, insisting she take breaks. He'd take her to Central Park, where they lay on the grass staring at the stars, whispering promises into the night. Sophia, who had grown up never expecting a fairy tale, felt like she was finally living one. When he introduced her to friends, he wrapped an arm protectively around her, proud to call her his. "She's the best thing that's ever happened to me," he declared more than once, and she believed every word. There were moments Sophia will never forget. The way he kissed her forehead before leaving for business trips, the way he held her close at night as if she was his anchor in a chaotic world. When he asked her to marry him, it wasn't at some glittering gala, but in the quiet corner of her tiny apartment. He knelt awkwardly, holding out a ring that sparkled against the dim kitchen light, and whispered, "Sophia, I can't imagine my life without you. Be my wife." Tears blurred her vision as she nodded, throwing her arms around him. That was the happiest night of her life. Their wedding day sealed the dream. Sophia walked down the aisle in a simple gown, clutching white lilies. David's eyes glistened as he took her hand, and for one beautiful moment, it felt like nothing could break them apart. But time has a way of testing love. What began as passion slowly warped under the pressure of wealth, pride, and poisonous whispers. Sophia often clung to those early memories, the roses, the laughter, the quiet promises, because deep down, she still longed for the man who once made her feel like the most cherished woman alive. But that man seemed to be slipping further and further away, replaced by someone colder than she ever thought possible. In a world that seemed determined to break her, Sophia Turner found one steady light, her best friend, Lily Parker. They had met years earlier during nursing school, two young women with different dreams but the same fierce determination to survive in a city that could swallow you whole. Lily was outspoken, bold, and unafraid to challenge anyone who dared to hurt the people she loved. While Sophia was gentle and quiet, Lily was fire. She had been there when David first swept Sophia off her feet, skeptical from the very beginning. "Be careful, Soph," she had warned with narrowed eyes. "Men like him, they're used to getting what they want, and when they're done, they move on." But Sophia, blinded by love, had smiled and shaken her head. "You don't know him like I do. He's different." At first, Lily wanted to believe her friend. She attended the wedding, dressed in pale blue, clapping as Sophia walked down the aisle radiant with joy. She cheered during the vows, trying to ignore the cold glances of the Miller family, who clearly looked down on Sophia's humble background. For Sophia's sake, Lily stayed silent. But as months passed, she began to notice changes. Sophia's cheerful phone calls grew shorter. Her laughter faded. When Lily visited the Grand Miller estate, she found her friend sitting alone on the balcony, eyes red from crying. "Tell me what's wrong," Lily demanded, gripping Sophia's hand. Sophia hesitated, then whispered, "He doesn't look at me the same anymore. He doesn't come home at night. Sometimes he accuses me of things I don't understand." Lily's heart burned with anger. She wanted to march inside, grab David by the collar, and demand answers. But looking at Sophia's fragile state, she swallowed her rage and instead pulled her into a tight embrace. Then I'll be your shield. Whatever happens, you're not facing this alone. From that day on, Lily became Sophia's silent guardian. She drove her to doctor appointments when David was too busy. She stayed overnight during the difficult months of pregnancy, holding Sophia's hand through the endless nausea and fainting spells. She cooked meals when Sophia was too weak, whispered encouragement when Sophia felt like giving up, and wiped away tears when the weight of betrayal grew too heavy. Sophia often told her, "I don't know what I'd do without you," and Lily would smile, hiding the fury she felt toward David. One night, Sophia finally confessed the cruelest wound. "He thinks the babies aren't his. He thinks I betrayed him with his father." Her voice cracked as she spoke, the shame unbearable. Lily's eyes widened in shock, then blazed with righteous anger. "That man is out of his mind. You've given him nothing but love, and this is how he treats you?" "No, Soph, I won't let him destroy you." But Sophia shook her head weakly. "Don't hate him, Lily. I just want him back. I just want my family whole." Lily bit her tongue, because deep down she knew the truth. The man Sophia longed for was already gone. And if things continued this way, Lily feared she would one day lose not just her friend's heart, but her very life. For a brief moment, Sophia believed that news of the twins would heal the cracks in their marriage. She imagined David's eyes lighting up with joy, his arms wrapping around her, his heart swelling with pride at the thought of becoming a father. She wanted to believe that the man she once loved so deeply still existed somewhere beneath the cold mask he now wore. The evening she told him, she had prepared everything with care. She cooked his favorite dinner, set the table with candles, and even wore the blue dress he once said made her look like the sky. Her hands trembled with both excitement and fear as she waited for him to return. When David finally walked in, he looked tired, distracted, his phone glued to his hand. "What's all this?" he asked flatly, barely glancing at the food. Sophia swallowed her nerves, reached for his hand, and whispered, "David, we're going to be parents. And not just one baby, twins." For a moment, silence filled the room. She searched his face for joy, for surprise, for anything that resembled love. But instead of happiness, his lips curved into a bitter smile. He pulled his hand away. "Twins?" His voice dripped with disbelief. "How convenient." Her heart sank. "David, what do you mean?" He paced the room, running a hand through his hair. "You expect me to believe this? That suddenly, after everything you're carrying, not one but two children? My children? Or maybe—" His eyes darkened. "Maybe they belong to my father." The words cut deeper than any blade. Sophia staggered back, clutching her stomach protectively. "How could you say that? Richard has never. He would never." But David didn't listen. His mind was clouded with jealousy, insecurity, and the poisonous whispers he'd absorbed from the world around him. In his heart, the line between truth and suspicion had already blurred. From that night, he grew colder. He stopped asking about her health, stopped attending doctor visits, and left her to face the frightening risks of a twin pregnancy alone. When she fainted one morning from exhaustion, it was Lily who rushed her to the hospital. David arrived hours later, annoyed, not concerned. "Maybe you're overdramatic," he muttered, scrolling through his phone, while Sophia lay pale and weak in the hospital bed. The gentle husband who once kissed her forehead and whispered promises at night was gone, replaced by a stranger who looked at her with suspicion rather than love. Sophia's heart broke a little more each day, but she held on for the babies. She told herself, "When he sees them, when he holds them, he'll believe. He'll love us again." But deep down, fear gnawed at her soul. Because every time she looked into his eyes, she no longer saw the man who had once vowed to stand by her side. Instead, she saw a man drifting further into the shadows of doubt and betrayal. And though Sophia carried life within her, she could feel something else dying: her marriage. Sophia tried to ignore the creeping changes in David's behavior, convincing herself that his coldness came from stress, from pressure, from anything but betrayal. She clung to the hope that once the babies arrived, their family would heal. But reality had a way of tearing through her illusions. The first sign came late one night. David claimed he was working late at the office, but when Sophia called his secretary the next morning to check if he'd made it home safely, the woman hesitated. He wasn't here last night, she admitted reluctantly. Sophia's hand shook as she set the phone down. She told herself maybe it was a misunderstanding, maybe he had stayed with a client. But in her heart, a storm began to brew. Then came the unfamiliar scent. David returned home in the early hours, his shirt wrinkled, his hair tousled. As he kissed her on the cheek, Sophia caught it, a faint trace of expensive perfume that wasn't hers. She froze, her stomach tightening, her mind screaming with questions she dared not ask. Days later, Lily noticed too. Soph, his jacket, look. She pointed to a lipstick stain near the collar, faint but undeniable. Sophia's face drained of color. She tried to laugh it off, claiming maybe it was from a careless waitress, but Lily's eyes hardened. Stop making excuses for him, he's lying to you. Sophia wanted to believe otherwise, but the evidence piled up. His phone, once left casually on the counter, was now guarded like treasure. He turned the screen away when she walked by, silenced his calls, and sometimes stepped outside to answer in hushed tones. One evening, when she was folding laundry, his phone buzzed on the nightstand. Against her better judgment, she glanced at the screen. A message lit up. I miss you already. Last night was unforgettable. Her heart dropped, her knees buckled, and the basket of clothes tumbled to the floor. When David walked in minutes later, she confronted him, her voice trembling. Who is she? His eyes narrowed. For a moment, guilt flickered across his face, but then he smirked. You're paranoid, Sophia. Maybe it's the hormones. Don't embarrass yourself. She felt the sting of humiliation, tears burning behind her eyes. But as he brushed past her, the faint perfume returned, wrapping around her like a cruel confirmation. The final blow came when a neighbor, an older woman who lived across from their penthouse, pulled Sophia aside in the hallway. Sweetheart, she whispered gently, I've seen him, with another woman, tall, blonde, always wearing red heels. They come in late thinking no one notices. Sophia's chest tightened. The betrayal she had feared was no longer suspicion, it was fact. She returned to the apartment, sat on the edge of the bed, and cradled her swollen belly. Her babies kicked as if reminding her she was not alone. Her voice broke into the silence. Why, David? Why would you throw us away? But there was no answer, only the echo of his footsteps as he disappeared into another night. And though Sophia's heart shattered, she knew this was only the beginning of a much deeper betrayal. The truth could only stay hidden for so long. One rainy evening, Sophia's growing suspicions pushed her beyond silence. Her heart pounded as she left the apartment, clutching an umbrella against the cold wind. David had claimed he was attending a late business dinner, but something inside her whispered otherwise. With trembling steps, she followed the driver who often chauffeured David. The black luxury car turned not toward the downtown offices, but to a high-end hotel glowing in the night. Sophia's chest tightened. She told herself she was wrong, that she would see him alone, perhaps meeting clients. But as she entered the lobby, her world collapsed. There he was. David stood by the elevator, laughing softly, his arm wrapped around a tall blonde in a crimson dress. The woman leaned into him, whispering in his ear, her perfume strong enough to choke Sophia even from across the room. The sight was undeniable. Sophia gasped, covering her mouth as tears blurred her vision. For a second, she wanted to turn away, to run, but her feet betrayed her. She stepped forward, her voice trembling but sharp enough to pierce the air. David? He froze, eyes widening in shock before narrowing into something darker. Anger. The blonde smirked, clearly unashamed, as if daring Sophia to challenge her. Sophia's voice cracked. How could you? While I'm carrying your children, you stand here with her. The lobby fell silent. A few onlookers turned their heads, whispering. Instead of guilt, David's face hardened. He stepped forward, his words like venom. Don't you dare make a scene, Sophia. Do you want everyone to think you're crazy? Her heart pounded. Crazy? I saw you. I followed you here because you've been lying to me. I'm your wife. But David only laughed coldly, the sound echoing through the marble hall. Maybe you should ask yourself why I don't believe those kids are mine. Maybe if you weren't so close with my father, I wouldn't be here. The accusation sliced her soul. Gasps rippled through the lobby. The blonde's smirk widened, enjoying every ounce of Sophia's humiliation. Sophia's body shook, her hand instinctively resting on her swollen belly as tears streamed down her cheeks. You think her voice cracked, you think I betrayed you with your own father? How could you believe something so vile? But David didn't soften. Instead, he pointed a finger at her as if she were the criminal. Don't pretend to be innocent, Sophia. Everyone sees it, the way he looks at you. Maybe these twins are his, not mine. The words were daggers. Sophia swayed, nearly collapsing, until a kind hotel worker rushed forward to steady her. The pain in her chest was unbearable, not just from betrayal but from the sheer cruelty of being blamed for sins she never committed. David turned away, offering his arm to the blonde as if nothing had happened. Go home, Sophia. Don't embarrass yourself further. Her tears blurred the glittering lights of the lobby as she whispered, You've already destroyed me. And as David walked into the elevator with his mistress, Sophia realized she was not only losing her husband, she was losing the last fragments of the life she once believed in. The confrontation at the hotel left Sophia shattered, but the damage wasn't only emotional. The stress and heartbreak began to take a heavy toll on her fragile body. Pregnancy with twins was already considered high risk, and now the weight of betrayal pressed on her chest like a crushing stone. In the weeks that followed, her health spiraled. She woke in the mornings with dizzy spells so strong she had to grip the walls just to reach the bathroom. Her ankles swelled. Her heartbeat raced unpredictably, and sometimes her vision blurred until she could hardly see. Worst of all were the sharp cramps that came without warning, forcing her to clutch her stomach in terror. At her next doctor's appointment, the physician frowned as he read the charts. Sophia, you need to be very careful. Your blood pressure is too high, and with twins you're at risk for preeclampsia. You must avoid stress. She forced a small smile, but her heart sank. How could she avoid stress when every night her husband came home later, his eyes colder, his phone buzzing with messages from another woman? Lily tried to step in, visiting daily, cooking healthy meals, helping with chores. She scolded Sophia gently. You have to put yourself first now. Forget David. Focus on those babies. But Sophia's heart wouldn't let go so easily. She still longed for the man she once knew, the man who used to hold her when storms frightened her, the man who once whispered dreams of a family. Deep down she prayed each night. Maybe when he sees them, he'll change. Maybe when he holds our children, he'll remember his love. One evening, the pain grew unbearable. Sophia collapsed in the kitchen, her hands trembling as the glass of water shattered beside her. Lily rushed her to the hospital, where doctors worked frantically to stabilize her. David arrived hours later, his face annoyed rather than worried. Another scare? He muttered, looking at her pale figure on the hospital bed. Sophia's lips quivered. David, I could have lost them. I could have died. Instead of comfort, his eyes narrowed. Or maybe this is all part of your act, trying to make me feel guilty so I'll forget what I know. Her heart sank deeper than ever. Even in her weakest moment, bleeding and frail, he still chose suspicion over love. The doctor pulled David aside. If she doesn't reduce stress and rest properly, she may not survive childbirth. You need to support her. But David only nodded absently, his thoughts elsewhere, already planning his next escape with the blonde who had stolen his attention. That night, as Sophia lay alone, she placed her hands over her belly. The babies kicked gently, as if reminding her she wasn't fighting just for herself. Tears rolled down her cheeks. She whispered, I'll protect you. No matter what it costs me, I'll bring you into this world. Her strength was dwindling, but her resolve grew stronger. She knew the road ahead would be filled with pain, perhaps even death. And yet, despite her suffering, she could not imagine that the cruelest storm was still waiting for her on the day she would give birth. The night Sophia went into labor, the city of New York was swallowed by a violent storm. Rain lashed against the hospital windows, thunder cracked like angry drums, and lightning split the sky into shards of white. Inside the sterile halls of St. Mary's private hospital, another storm raged. A storm inside Sophia's body, threatening both her life and the lives of her unborn twins. It began with sharp contractions that gripped her like claws, stealing her breath and forcing her to cry out in agony. Lily rushed to her side immediately, her hand steady as she whispered, You're going to be okay, Soph. I'm right here. But Sophia's face was pale, her eyes filled with fear. She knew the warnings the doctors had given her. Her blood pressure, her fragile condition, the risks of carrying twins. Every contraction felt like her body was breaking apart. Nurses wheeled her swiftly into the delivery room, the monitors already screaming with each irregular heartbeat. The doctor barked orders. "Prep for emergency delivery. We need extra units of blood on standby." Sophia gripped Lily's hand until her knuckles turned white. Between gasps she whispered, "Promise me, if anything happens, take care of them. Please." Tears filled Lily's eyes, but she nodded. "Don't you dare talk like that. You're going to meet them yourself." The first hours of labor were brutal. Sweat drenched Sophia's forehead, her screams echoing off the sterile walls. The storm outside battered the city as if the heavens themselves were weeping for her. Blood stained the sheets far too quickly, and panic began to spread among the medical staff. And then, just when she thought she couldn't bear another moment of pain, the door swung open. David strode in, his suit dry despite the storm outside, his expression cold, detached. Instead of rushing to her side, instead of offering the comfort of a husband, he stood at the foot of the bed with his arms crossed. Sophia's tear-filled eyes met his. "David, please, I need you." But his lips twisted into a cruel smile. "What a scene. You're bleeding, screaming, and yet I can't help but wonder, are these even my children?" The words crushed what little strength she had left. Nurses froze, glancing at one another in disbelief. Lily nearly exploded with fury, but Sophia's weak grip held her back. Her heart pounded as she fought for air. How can you say that? David, look at me. These are yours." But he only chuckled, shaking his head. "Maybe they're his, my father's. Isn't that what everyone whispers?" Another contraction ripped through her body, nearly tearing her apart. The monitors blared, nurses shouting about dropping vitals. Blood poured faster, staining the sheets a dark crimson. The storm outside howled, matching the chaos within. Sophia screamed as the doctor shouted, "We're losing her. We need to move faster." David leaned back against the wall, smirking as if he were watching a play. "If you're lying, Sophia, the truth will come out tonight." And just as she thought her world would collapse entirely, the door burst open again, and a commanding voice thundered through the room, and with it came the revelation that would shatter every lie. The delivery room became a battlefield between life and death. Alarms shrieked as Sophia's blood pressure plummeted, her body convulsing from the sheer loss of blood. Nurses pressed down with gauze, doctors shouted for more transfusions, and the metallic scent of blood filled the air. Sophia's lips trembled as she whispered, "Please, save them, my babies." Her strength was fading, her voice barely audible, yet her spirit clung fiercely to the lives of her unborn children. But instead of standing beside her, David leaned casually against the wall, his face twisted into a smirk that belonged more to an enemy than a husband. His laughter broke through the panic, cold and cruel, slicing through Sophia's pain like glass. "Look at this pathetic scene," he sneered, his voice dripping with venom. "A wife bleeding to death, fighting for children that aren't even mine. Maybe now the truth will spill out along with all that blood." Gasps spread across the room. A nurse froze mid-step, horrified by his words. Lily, standing at Sophia's side, clenched her fists until her nails dug into her palms. She wanted to scream at him, to slap the smirk from his face, but Sophia's weakening grip on her hand kept her rooted. Sophia's eyes filled with tears, her voice shaking as she begged, "David, why are you saying this? You're their father. You promised." David cut her off with a laugh that chilled the room. "Promised? Don't make me laugh. I've seen the way my father looks at you. I've heard the whispers. These twins, maybe they're his gift to you, not mine." The accusation hung in the air like poison. Sophia's chest heaved, her heart splitting between physical agony and emotional devastation. The monitors screamed louder, her pulse erratic, her body on the brink of collapse. The doctor barked orders, "We're losing her. Prepare for an emergency C-section. Now!" Nurses scrambled, rushing equipment, yet David remained unmoved, his cruel amusement echoing louder than the thunder outside. Lily finally snapped, her voice shaking with rage. "You monster, can't you see she's dying? This woman has given everything for you, and you stand here mocking her? What kind of man laughs at his wife's deathbed?" David's expression hardened, but his smirk never vanished. A man who refuses to be fooled. "If she dies tonight, at least I'll know the truth when the DNA results come out, and if they prove me right, she'll take her shame to the grave." Sophia sobbed, clutching her belly as another wave of pain tore through her. her vision blurred, her body trembling uncontrollably. She looked at David one last time, searching for the man she once loved, the man who had once held her under the stars and promised forever. But all she saw was hatred, suspicion, and betrayal. The storm outside roared, lightning flashing through the hospital window. Sophia's eyes rolled back as she lost consciousness, her body limp against the blood-soaked sheets. The room erupted into chaos, doctors shouting for more oxygen, nurses rushing to save her and the unborn twins. And through it all, David laughed, a cruel, heartless sound that echoed over the beeping monitors and Sophia's fading heartbeat. But in the very next breath, that laughter would be silenced by a truth far greater than his lies. Just when the chaos seemed unbearable, the delivery room door slammed open with a force that silenced everyone. Standing in the doorway, drenched from the storm but radiating authority, was Richard Miller. The patriarch of the Miller Empire, David's father. His sharp eyes swept across the scene, taking in Sophia's pale, blood-soaked body, the frantic doctors, and his son leaning against the wall with a mocking smirk. In his hand, clutched tightly like a weapon, was a sealed envelope. His voice thundered above the storm, cold and commanding. Enough! Everyone froze. Even David straightened, his smug grin faltering as he recognized the fire in his father's eyes. Richard strode into the room, each step deliberate, his presence filling the space with gravity. He stopped beside Sophia's bed, his expression softening as he looked down at her fragile form. For the first time there was no calculation, no judgment, only concern. "Hold on, Sophia," he murmured, almost like a father to a daughter. "Don't you give up." Then his gaze snapped toward David, sharp as a blade. "You stand here laughing while your wife bleeds? Do you even understand what you're about to lose?" David's jaw tightened. "I'm not the fool here. Those children aren't mine. They could be yours, Father." The words echoed like a gunshot. The nurses gasped. Even the doctor paused for a split second before resuming his frantic work. But Richard did not flinch. Instead, he raised the envelope high. "You dare accuse me?" His voice was low, dangerous. "You've let jealousy rot your heart, but tonight, the truth ends all lies." With a swift motion, he tore open the envelope and unfolded the document inside. The paper trembled in his hands, not from weakness, but from the weight of the moment. His eyes scanned the lines, then he lifted his gaze to meet David's. "These results," he declared, holding up the DNA test, "prove beyond all doubt that the twins Sophia carries are yours, David. Not mine. Yours." The room fell into stunned silence. The only sounds were the storm raging outside and the steady beeping of the monitors. David's face drained of color. He staggered backward, his smirk shattered, his breath caught in his throat. That can't be." Richard stepped closer, his voice like steel. "You've accused your wife of the vilest betrayal. You've shamed her, abandoned her, and laughed at her suffering. And all for nothing. These children are your blood, your future. And you," his eyes narrowed, "you nearly destroyed them." Sophia stirred weakly, her eyes fluttering open for a brief moment. She saw Richard standing tall beside her, the paper in his hand, and whispered with the last of her strength, "I told you, David, they're ours." Her head fell back against the pillow, her body trembling as the doctors rushed to save her. David fell to his knees, his pride collapsing with him. Tears spilled down his face as the weight of his cruelty crashed upon him. He looked at his father, then at Sophia, broken and bleeding, and for the first time his voice cracked with despair. "Please, forgive me. I was wrong." But forgiveness would not come so easily. For though the truth had finally been revealed, the damage was already done, and Sophia's life still hung by a thread. The air inside the delivery room was thick with tension. Outside, the storm still roared, but it was nothing compared to the storm raging between father and son. Richard Miller stood tall, the DNA results still clutched in his hand, while David knelt on the blood-stained floor, his arrogance shattered. "You've embarrassed yourself," Richard thundered, his voice like a gavel striking judgment. "You've shamed this family, and worse, you've broken the heart of the woman who carried your children. What kind of man laughs while his wife bleeds?" David's eyes brimmed with tears, his voice cracking as he reached for his father. I thought," people said. "People?" Richard's eyes blazed. "You let gossip and whispers control you? You let envy twist your mind until you accused your own wife of the unthinkable? You thought she betrayed you with me, your own father? His voice trembled, not with weakness but with fury. David's shoulders sagged under the weight of his father's words. I've spent my whole life in your shadow. Nothing I do is ever enough. When I saw how you treated her, how kind you were, he choked back a sob. I thought maybe she was the reason you looked at me with disappointment. Richard's jaw tightened. For a moment, his face softened, but then his anger returned. My disappointment was never because of her. It was because of you. You have every privilege, every opportunity, and instead of showing strength, you chose weakness. You chose suspicion. You chose betrayal. The words struck David harder than any blow. He clutched his head, shaking as tears dripped onto the floor. I know, I see it now, I was blind. And while I doubted her, she was fighting for my children, for my legacy. He turned toward Sophia's pale body on the bed, tubes and wires surrounding her fragile frame. God, what have I done? Richard knelt down, forcing David to look him in the eye. His voice dropped to a low, cutting tone. You still have a chance to be a man, but it begins with humility, with facing the truth, with begging her for forgiveness, not because she owes it to you, but because you don't deserve it. David's lips trembled. I'll do anything. Please, Father, tell me I can make this right. Richard rose again, towering over his son. His presence filled the room, commanding both fear and respect. That's not for me to decide. It's for Sophia. And right now, the only thing that matters is whether she survives this night. A sudden cry from the monitors pulled their attention back to her. The doctor shouted, We're losing her again. Prepare for the second baby. Move, now. Nurses rushed, the atmosphere electrified with urgency. David reached out desperately toward Sophia, his tears falling freely. Stay with me. Please don't leave me. I was wrong. I was so wrong. But Sophia's eyes fluttered shut once more, her body trembling violently as the medical team fought to keep her alive. Richard's gaze hardened as he turned to his son. If she dies tonight, David, her blood will stain your hands. And nothing, not money, not status, not excuses, will wash it away. And as the doctors prepared for the final push, the room braced for the outcome that would either save their family or destroy it forever. The delivery room erupted into controlled chaos as Sophia's body convulsed under the weight of labor. Her skin was ghostly pale, drenched in sweat, her lips trembling as if each breath might be her last. The monitors screamed with warning tones, red numbers flashing across the screen. Her blood pressure is crashing, a nurse shouted. The doctor's voice was sharp. We need to deliver these babies now, or we'll lose all three. Sophia, barely conscious, felt the world slipping away. She heard fragments of voices, felt hands pressing against her, and smelled the sharp sting of antiseptic and iron. Somewhere inside her fogged mind, she whispered to herself, Hold on. For them. For my babies. With a final, agonizing push, the first child entered the world. A shrill cry pierced the tension, echoing through the room like a miracle. The doctor lifted the baby briefly, a tiny girl with flailing arms, before handing her to a nurse. Baby one is breathing. Keep her warm. Sophia managed a weak smile through her tears. My daughter, she whispered, her voice breaking. But the ordeal was far from over. Her body convulsed again, blood pouring faster, staining the sheets a deep crimson. The doctor's face tightened. We're not done. Baby two is still inside, and she's hemorrhaging badly. Move, people. David staggered forward, his arrogance stripped away, replaced by pure panic. He reached for Sophia's hand, tears streaming down his face. Please, Soph, stay with me. I was wrong. I was blind. Don't leave me now. Sophia's eyelids fluttered, her lips forming faint words. Promise. Promise you'll love them. Even if. Her voice faded before she could finish. No, David cried, shaking his head desperately. Don't talk like that. I'll love them. I swear. Just stay alive, please. The second contraction ripped through her, forcing another push that nearly tore her apart. The room filled with shouts. Nurses rushing blood bags, machines beeping wildly. Richard stood at the foot of the bed, his fists clenched, watching helplessly as his daughter-in-law fought for life. Finally, with a scream that echoed through the storm outside, the second baby arrived. Another cry broke through the chaos. A boy this time, strong and loud. The nurse lifted him briefly before rushing him to the incubator. Baby two is breathing. Both are alive. Relief washed over the room. But it was fleeting. Sophia's body went limp, her eyes closing as blood continued to pool beneath her. The doctor shouted. "She's going into shock. We're losing her again." David collapsed to his knees beside the bed, clutching her hand as his tears drenched her skin. "Don't go, Sophia. Please, I'll do anything. I'll change. Just come back to me. Don't leave me to raise them without you. I can't. I can't lose you." Richard's voice trembled, though it remained firm. "Fight, Sophia. Fight for those children. Fight for yourself." The medical team worked frantically, pressing, stitching, transfusing. Minutes felt like hours, the storm outside hammering against the windows. Then, just when hope seemed to slip away, a faint beep sounded steady on the monitor. Sophia's chest rose with a fragile breath. Color slowly returned to her cheeks. The doctor exhaled with relief. "She's stabilizing. She's not out of danger yet, but she's holding on." David sobbed openly, pressing his forehead against her hand. The twins had entered the world alive, but Sophia's survival was still uncertain, and her forgiveness even more so. The storm outside was beginning to quiet, but inside the hospital, the storm within David Miller had only just begun. The cries of his newborn twins echoed through the delivery room, fragile, pure, undeniable proof of his bloodline. And beside them lay Sophia, pale and trembling, her body still fighting to hold on to life. Richard stood tall near the bed, the DNA test still in his hand. His voice was calm now, but the weight of his words cut deeper than any blade. "There it is, David. The truth you refused to see. These children are yours. She never betrayed you. It was your fear, your jealousy, your weakness that turned love into poison." David crumbled to the floor, his body shaking as sobs tore from his chest. He buried his face in his hands, shame swallowing him whole. "What have I done?" He whispered, his voice breaking. "I've destroyed her. I accused her of the unthinkable. I laughed while she was dying." Lily, who stood protectively at Sophia's side, glared at him with eyes burning with fury. "You don't get to cry now, David. She needed you, and you weren't there. You nearly killed her with your cruelty." Her words pierced him like arrows, but he didn't defend himself. He knew she was right. Every memory of his accusations, his mockery, and his nights with another woman came crashing back, each one another dagger of guilt. He crawled toward Sophia's bed, his hands trembling as he reached for her limp fingers. "Sophia, I don't deserve you. I don't deserve these children. But please, please don't leave me. I'll spend the rest of my life making this right if you'll just open your eyes." Sophia stirred faintly, her eyelids fluttering, but she did not answer. The machines beeped steadily, her fragile breaths the only sign she was still with them. Richard's voice broke the silence again, heavy with authority. "You were so desperate to be seen, David, so desperate to step out of my shadow, and yet instead of proving your strength, you revealed your weakness. A real man protects his family. A real man trusts you." His eyes hardened. "You nearly lost everything because of your pride." David bowed his head, unable to meet his father's gaze. "I know. And I'll never forgive myself. But will she? Can she?" He looked back at Sophia, his tears falling freely onto her hand. Lily crossed her arms, her voice sharp. "Forgiveness isn't something you can demand, David. It's something you earned if she even chooses to give it." The truth hung heavy in the room. For the first time, David saw himself clearly, not as the powerful heir, not as the husband in control, but as a broken man who had betrayed the one person who loved him unconditionally. The cries of the twins grew louder, as if demanding his attention. He turned, seeing them wrapped in soft blankets, innocent and untouched by the sins of their father. His chest heaved with fresh sobs. "I almost robbed them of their mother. I almost robbed myself of the chance to be their father." He pressed his forehead against Sophia's hand, his voice shaking with desperation. "Please, God, don't take her from me. Don't let my punishment be her death." The hours that followed felt endless. Doctors worked tirelessly, and at last the monitors steadied. Sophia Turner was alive, but only barely. Her breaths came shallow, her skin remained ghostly pale, and her body trembled even in sleep. It would be days before anyone knew whether she was truly out of danger. Lily sat vigil by her side, gently wiping Sophia's damp forehead with a cloth, whispering prayers under her breath. The twins rested in the nursery, their tiny cries softened by the distance. Yet their presence was a reminder of what Sophia had fought so hard to protect. David stood in the corner, shoulders slumped, his eyes hollow with regret. Every fiber of his being wanted to rush to her, to beg her forgiveness the moment she awoke. But guilt shackled him in place. Each time he looked at her fragile body, he heard his own cruel laughter echoing back at him. Richard finally broke the heavy silence. His deep voice carried the weight of both judgment and sorrow. "Look at her, David. Look at what your doubt and arrogance nearly cost." David lowered his head, tears dripping onto the cold hospital floor. "I know, Father, I know. I was blinded by jealousy, poisoned by whispers. I doubted her, doubted the children, doubted everything. And now—" His voice cracked. "Now I don't deserve to be her husband." Richard's eyes, sharp as ever, didn't waver. He stepped closer, his words deliberate. "You're right. You don't deserve her. Not after what you've done. But that doesn't mean you can't choose what kind of man you'll be from this day forward." David's chest heaved, his hands trembling. "Tell me how. Tell me what to do. I'll do anything." Richard pointed toward Sophia's unconscious form. "Then start by being the man she believed you were. The man who swore to protect her. No more lies, no more affairs, no more weakness. If she wakes up and chooses to forgive you, you'll spend the rest of your life proving you're worthy. And if she doesn't—" his tone hardened like steel, "you'll raise those children with respect to her memory, never letting them suffer for your sins." David's tears fell harder. He dropped to his knees, clutching his father's hand. "I swear it. On my life, I swear. I'll never hurt her again. I'll never let her down." Richard pulled his hand away, his eyes still cold. "Words mean nothing, David. Only actions matter now." Lily, listening, turned to David with fiery eyes. "You think promises erase what you did? You left her alone in the darkest moments of her life. You laughed while she bled. Don't you dare ask for forgiveness unless you're willing to fight for it every single day." David nodded, his voice breaking. "I will. I'll fight. I'll change." For a moment, silence returned, broken only by the storm dying down outside. Richard walked to the window, staring at the faint light of dawn breaking through the clouds. "This family will not survive another betrayal, David. If you fail again, if you ever let suspicion or pride destroy what Sophia fought to protect, you'll answer to me." David swallowed hard, his body trembling under the weight of his father's words. He turned back to Sophia, whispering through his tears, "Please wake up, Sophia. Give me one more chance to make this right." While Sophia lay in fragile recovery, another storm brewed outside the hospital walls. One that would strip David of the very illusions he had clung to. The woman he had once chosen over his wife, the mistress who whispered lies into his ear, was about to show her true colors. Her name was Vanessa, a blonde socialite with sharp heels and sharper ambition. She had been the poison in David's veins, feeding his doubts about Sophia, encouraging his suspicions, and wrapping him in false affection. Whenever he questioned Sophia's loyalty, Vanessa's velvet voice would drip with venom. "Are you sure those babies are yours?" Richard looks at her differently, doesn't he? Don't be blind, David. And blinded he had been. He showered Vanessa with gifts, jewelry, designer clothes, a penthouse apartment in her name. He gave her access to accounts Sophia never knew existed. Every dollar he spent was a betrayal of his vows, a theft from the family he should have been protecting. But when the truth surfaced in the hospital, the DNA results proving Sophia's innocence, Vanessa was nowhere to be found. For days, David tried calling her, desperate for comfort, for the distraction she once provided. Each call went unanswered, each message left in silence. Then came the final blow. His bank notified him of irregular transfers. Accounts he thought secure had been drained. The penthouse he bought for Vanessa was empty, the closets cleared out, the safe stripped bare. David drove there in a frenzy, rain streaking his windshield, his hands trembling on the wheel. When he arrived, the doorman gave him a look of pity. "She left, Mr. Miller, with another man, a businessman from Chicago." They were laughing as they carried out the last of the bags. David's stomach dropped. He stumbled into the penthouse, his voice echoing through the empty halls. The scent of her perfume lingered faintly, but her presence was gone. Drawers yawned open, jewelry boxes sat empty, and the echo of betrayal rang louder than his footsteps. He fell to his knees in the center of the room, clutching his head. No, she wouldn't. But the truth was undeniable. Vanessa had taken everything. His money, his pride, his illusions. In that hollow silence, memories of Sophia flooded his mind. Her gentle hands, her soft laughter, the way she smiled even when exhausted from work. and then he remembered his own cruelty, mocking her, accusing her, abandoning her in her hour of need. He had traded a diamond for dust, a faithful wife for a snake in high heels. Tears blurred his vision as he whispered into the empty room, "I betrayed the only woman who ever loved me. For this." When he finally stumbled back to the hospital, he was a broken man. His suit was wrinkled, his hair disheveled, his eyes bloodshot from crying. Lily looked at him with disgust, Richard with cold disappointment. But David no longer tried to defend himself. "I lost everything," he confessed, his voice raw. "And I deserve it. But please, I can't lose her too." He turned toward Sophia's room, his heart pounding. He had lost his wealth, his mistress, and his pride. But the question remained, could he still win back the love of the woman he had nearly destroyed? The sterile hospital room was quiet, save for the rhythmic beeping of machines. Days had passed since the harrowing night of labor, and Sophia Turner had hovered between life and death. Nurses moved gently around her, checking vitals, adjusting IVs, whispering as though afraid their voices might disturb her fragile hold on life. Lily sat faithfully at her bedside, refusing to leave even for a moment. She held Sophia's hand, whispering stories of the twins, describing their tiny fingers and soft cries. "They're beautiful, Soph. They're waiting for you. You have to wake up and see them." Then one morning, as dawn light spilled across the room, Sophia's fingers twitched. Her eyelids fluttered, heavy but determined, until they opened just enough to reveal her weary eyes. Lily gasped, tears flooding instantly. "Sophia? Can you hear me?" Sophia's lips parted, her voice hoarse and fragile. "My babies." Relief and joy collided as Lily squeezed her hand. "They're safe, both of them, alive and strong. You did it, Soph." The news drew a faint smile across Sophia's pale face, but her exhaustion was overwhelming. Even so, her heart burned to hold her children, to see with her own eyes what she had nearly given her life for. Richard entered quietly, his stern face softening at the sight of her awake. "Welcome back, Sophia," he said gently. "You gave us all quite a scare." But standing behind him, broken and trembling, was David. His once proud posture was gone. His suit hung loose, his eyes swollen from sleepless nights. When he saw Sophia's eyes on him, he fell to his knees beside her bed. "Sophia?" His voice cracked like a child's. "I don't deserve to even speak your name. I betrayed you. I accused you of things so vile, so cruel. I laughed while you bled. And now?" He clasped her hand desperately, his tears wetting her skin. "Now I beg you, please forgive me." Sophia looked at him for a long moment, her chest rising weakly, her gaze steady despite her frailty. She remembered every wound, his cold eyes, his mocking laughter, his betrayal at the hotel. Her heart ached with the memory of his mistrust, yet it also remembered the man she once loved, the man who had asked her to be his wife under the glow of their tiny kitchen light. Her voice was faint, but each word cut through the silence. "You broke me, David. You broke everything I believed in. I fought for our children while you abandoned me." David sobbed, pressing his forehead against her hand. "I know. I've lost everything. Vanessa, the money, my pride. She betrayed me and left me with nothing. But it's nothing compared to what I did to you. Please don't take them from me too. Don't take you from me." Sophia's eyes filled with tears. She closed them briefly, inhaling shakily. Forgiveness was not easy. It would never erase the pain. But when she opened her eyes again, she saw her twins in her mind's eye, the future they deserved, the family she had longed for. "I don't forgive you yet," she whispered, "but I will give you a chance. Not for you, but for them. Prove you can be the father they deserve, and maybe one day, the man I married." David wept openly, clinging to her hand as though it were his lifeline. For the first time, hope flickered in the ruins of their broken marriage. But whether that hope would bloom or wither depended on the choices he made next. The days following Sophia's awakening were filled with both relief and uncertainty. Though she had survived the harrowing birth, her body remained weak, and her heart carried wounds far deeper than any doctor could heal. Yet, within the quiet walls of her hospital room, hope began to flicker. Her twins, tiny miracles wrapped in soft blankets, were placed gently in her arms. For the first time, Sophia gazed upon both of them, tears streaming down her cheeks as she whispered, "You were worth every drop of blood. You are my everything." Richard stood by her side, his usually stern demeanor softened by pride. He gazed at his grandchildren as though they were treasures beyond his vast fortune. "They're strong," he said quietly, "just like their mother." His hand rested briefly on Sophia's shoulder, a silent gesture of respect. He had always judged quickly, but now he saw her as the anchor of the Miller legacy, the one who had endured more than anyone else. Meanwhile, David lingered in the background, his once confident figure now marked by humility. Every time he approached Sophia, guilt weighed him down. He changed diapers, fetched warm bottles, and stayed up at night, rocking the twins when they cried. He did everything without complaint, desperate to prove that he was no longer the selfish man who had nearly destroyed them. Yet, Sophia's eyes often carried hesitation. She allowed him near, but the barrier between them remained. Trust, once broken, is not so easily repaired. One evening, Richard called David into the corridor. His voice was low but commanding. "You've been given a second chance, David. Few men get that. Do not waste it." David nodded, his voice hoarse. "I know, Father. I've lost everything else. All I have now is them, and I'll spend the rest of my life proving I'm worthy." Richard studied him for a long moment before responding. "Sophia deserves more than words. She deserves actions. Show her that you can be the man she needs, the father your children deserve. Fail again, and you won't just lose her. You'll lose me." The weight of his father's ultimatum pressed heavily on David's chest, but it also lit a fire in him. From that day on, he devoted himself entirely to Sophia and the twins. He learned the small details, how to warm a bottle to the right temperature, how to gently soothe their cries, how to let Sophia rest while he took the night shifts. Lily remained cautious, watching every move he made. Her protective gaze reminded David that forgiveness was still on trial. But she couldn't deny the change in him. The way his tears fell when he thought no one was looking. The way his hands trembled with fear whenever Sophia coughed or winced. Sophia herself remained guarded, but as she watched David cradle their son, his eyes filled with love and sorrow. A piece of her heart softened. Healing would be slow, but perhaps not impossible. And as dawn broke one quiet morning, Sophia realized the family she once thought shattered might still be rebuilt, if David could prove his redemption was real. Weeks passed, and the storm that once tore Sophia's life apart began to settle into something quieter, gentler. The twins grew stronger each day, their cries filling the house with new life. Sophia, though still recovering, found strength in motherhood. Each time she looked at her children, she was reminded of why she had fought so hard to survive. David remained by her side, no longer the arrogant man who once doubted her, but a humbled husband learning what love truly meant. He bathed the twins, sang lullabies in a trembling voice, and woke at all hours to comfort them. For the first time, his hands, once used to sign business deals and stroke another woman's hair, were devoted entirely to the family he had nearly lost. Sophia watched him with cautious eyes. Forgiveness did not come easily. She remembered his cruelty, his laughter as she bled, his accusations that cut deeper than any wound. But she also saw the man on his knees now, broken and desperate, rebuilding himself piece by piece. Her heart warred between pain and the faint stirrings of the love that once bound them. Richard visited often, holding his grandchildren with unexpected tenderness. His stern gaze lingered on David, a silent reminder of the ultimatum he had given. Yet beneath the steel, there was pride. Richard had seen the worst in his son, but he was also witnessing change, real change. One evening, as the family gathered in the living room, David finally spoke. He knelt before Sophia, his hands trembling as he took hers. "Sophia, I don't deserve your love. I may never earn back the trust I destroyed, but I want to spend the rest of my life trying. Not for me, for you, for them." His voice cracked as he glanced at the twins, cooing softly in their crib. "Please, give me a chance to be the man you and our children need." Tears welled in Sophia's eyes. The memory of her suffering burned within her, yet as she looked into his eyes, she saw sincerity. She saw not the cruel man who had betrayed her, but the broken one who had learned through loss what truly mattered. Her voice was soft but steady. "I can't erase the pain, David. I won't forget. But I will forgive. Not because you deserve it, but because our children deserve a whole family. And because holding on to anger will only destroy what little strength I have left." David broke down, sobbing as he pressed her hands to his lips. Relief and gratitude shook his entire body. Richard, watching silently, allowed the faintest smile to touch his face. For once, the Miller family was united, not by wealth, but by love hard-won through suffering. As dawn painted the sky with golden light, Sophia sat with her twins in her arms, David at her side, and Richard standing proudly behind them. The family that had nearly been destroyed now stood on the path of healing. Sophia whispered to her babies, her voice filled with hope. "We survived the storm. And now, my loves, we begin again." And with that, the story closed not with tragedy, but with redemption, forgiveness, and the promise of a brighter tomorrow. So that's it, my wonderful friends. The story has reached its end, and if you are still here with me right now, it must mean something in this journey touched your heart in its own way. What we saw through Sophia's suffering and David's downfall is a reminder that trust, love, and forgiveness are fragile but powerful. The Stoics said, "The obstacle is the way." Sometimes pain and betrayal become the very lessons that guide us toward healing and strength. Like Marcus Aurelius reminded us, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Sophia chose not to let bitterness destroy her. She chose love and a new beginning. And maybe that's what life asks from all of us. To rise again after storms, to rebuild instead of staying broken. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe, because together we can keep spreading stories that heal.
The conference room fell deadly silent except for the sound of Simone's heart shattering into a million pieces. Marcus couldn't even look at her as she stood frozen in the doorway, still holding the laptop she'd forgotten, while Vivian hastily pulled down her skirt behind the very table where Simone had shared her grandmother's most sacred recipes just hours before. "How long?" Simone's voice cut through the tension like a knife. Marcus finally raised his eyes, guilt written across every line of his face. "Simone, I can explain." "How long, Marcus?" Her voice echoed off the walls. Vivian stepped forward, her usual sharp confidence nowhere to be found. "Simone, we never meant for you to find out like this." 6 months, Marcus whispered, his voice barely audible. 6 months. 6 months of lies. 6 months of her cooking elaborate dinners for a man who was being fed elsewhere. 6 months of pouring her soul into recipes while he poured his heart into someone else. "You didn't just break my heart," Simone said, her voice steady despite the earthquake inside her chest. "You stole my entire future." Welcome back, Golden Family, to my incredible subscribers who make this journey possible. Thank you for being here. Your support means everything, and today's story will remind you why authentic love always wins in the end, so please stay with me till the end. 5 years. 5 beautiful, intoxicating years of the kind of love that makes you believe in fairy tales. The kind where he'd wake up early just to watch her move around the kitchen, her dark skin glowing in the morning light as she whispered sweet words to ingredients like they were old friends. "Baby, you're making magic again," Marcus would say, sliding his arms around her waist from behind, pressing kisses to her neck while she stirred whatever culinary masterpiece was taking shape on their stove. Simone would melt into his embrace, her body fitting perfectly against his chest. "It's not magic, Marcus. It's love. Love makes everything taste better." And God, did she love him. Loved the way he believed in her dreams when she was just a culinary school graduate with big ambitions and bigger heart. Loved how he'd sit for hours listening to her talk about flavor profiles and cultural fusion, his eyes lighting up not because he understood every word, but because he understood her passion. "You're going to change the food world, Simone," he'd tell her after she'd earned her James Beard nomination at just 28. "And I want to be right there beside you when you do it." That nomination changed everything for them. Suddenly, Simone wasn't just Marcus's talented girlfriend who could cook, she was a rising star in the culinary world, someone with the vision and skill to build something extraordinary. "We should start our own company," Marcus said one night as they lay tangled in silk sheets, her head on his chest, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "Combine your culinary genius with my business sense. We could create something the food media world has never seen." Simone lifted her head to look at him, her eyes sparkling with possibility. A multimedia food empire? Cookbooks, videos, interactive experiences? Exactly. But not just any food company. Marcus's voice grew passionate as he painted their future in words. Something that honors your heritage, your grandmother's recipes, your story. Something real and authentic in a world full of fake food personalities. She kissed him then, deep and slow, tasting their shared dreams on his lips. "Nourish Media," she whispered against his mouth. "What?" That's what we'll call it. Nourish Media. Because we're not just feeding bodies, we're nourishing souls. 4 months, they worked side by side, turning their Oakland apartment into a makeshift office by day and returning it to their love nest by night. Simone would develop recipes while Marcus handled business plans and investor meetings. They'd test dishes together, her feeding him spoonfuls of this and that, both of them moaning with pleasure when she got the flavors just right. "This jollof rice mac and cheese is going to make you famous," Marcus said one evening, his eyes rolling back as he savored another bite. "Us famous," Simone corrected, wiping a drop of cheese sauce from his chin before licking it off her thumb. "We're in this together, remember? Forever," he promised, pulling her onto his lap and kissing her like he meant it. But as their business dreams grew bigger, Marcus realized they needed help, specifically, someone who understood digital marketing and brand building in ways neither of them did. "I found her," he announced one day, bursting through their apartment door with the kind of excitement usually reserved for good news. "The missing piece of our puzzle." Simone looked up from her laptop where she'd been writing recipe descriptions. "Her? Vivian Carrick. She's brilliant, Simone. Worked with some of the biggest food brands on the West Coast. She specializes in taking authentic voices and helping them reach massive audiences without losing what makes them special." Something flickered in Simone's chest, not quite jealousy, but a protective instinct she couldn't name. "And she wants to work with us? She wants to partner with us. Equal partnership, the three of us. She's seen your James Beard nomination, watched some of our test videos. She thinks we could build something revolutionary." Simone closed her laptop, giving Marcus her full attention. "What's she like?" "Sharp. Focused. She has these intense eyes that seem to see right through you. But in a good way, like she can see potential where others see problems." "And you trust her?" Marcus sat beside her on their couch, taking her hands in his. "Baby, I trust us. What we have is unbreakable. Adding Vivian to the team just means we'll build our dreams faster and bigger than we ever could alone." The first time Simone met Vivian Carrick, she understood exactly what Marcus meant about those eyes. They were pale gray like winter storms and seemed to catalog everything they saw. Vivian was tall and lean, with sharp cheekbones and blonde hair that fell in perfect waves. She carried herself with the confidence of someone who'd never been told she couldn't have something she wanted. "Simone," Vivian said, extending a manicured hand. "I've been dying to meet the genius behind those flavor combinations. Your jollof mac and cheese recipe is going to change everything." "Thank you," Simone replied, noting how Vivian's handshake was firm, professional, and held just a beat too long. "I have so many ideas for how we can position your cookbook," Vivian continued, her eyes lighting up with the kind of enthusiasm that was infectious. "The fusion of Southern comfort food with West African flavors, it's not just delicious, it's culturally revolutionary. We can build a brand around authenticity, heritage, and innovation." Despite her initial wariness, Simone found herself drawn to Vivian's vision. This woman understood the deeper meaning behind her recipes, saw them not just as food but as storytelling vehicles for cultural connection and personal history. "She gets it," Simone told Marcus that night as they prepared dinner together. "She really understands what I'm trying to do with the fusion concept." "I told you she was perfect for us," Marcus said, seasoning the chicken while Simone prepped vegetables. "The three of us are going to build something incredible." And so Nourish Media was born, a beautiful triangle of ambition, creativity, and trust. Simone brought the culinary vision and authentic voice. Marcus provided business acumen and operational structure. Vivian delivered marketing brilliance and brand strategy. Their first official meeting as partners took place in a rented conference room in downtown Oakland, the same room where months later, Simone's heart would be shattered beyond recognition. But that day it was full of hope and possibility. "To Nourish Media," Marcus said, raising his coffee cup in a toast. "And to the three most determined people I know finally joining forces to change the food media landscape. To authentic voices and revolutionary flavors," Vivian added, her gray eyes sparkling with ambition. "To family recipes finally getting the platform they deserve," Simone concluded, clinking her cup against theirs. Family recipes. That phrase would come back to haunt her in ways she never could have imagined. Because when you share your family's most sacred culinary secrets with people you trust, you're not just sharing ingredients and techniques, you're sharing your soul, your history, your grandmother's love made manifest in every carefully measured spoon of spice. And some people, Simone would learn, see that vulnerability not as a gift to be treasured, but as a weakness to be exploited. The cookbook project became Simone's obsession in the most beautiful way possible. Every morning she'd wake up in Marcus's arms and immediately start talking about flavor combinations and cultural connections, her voice animated with the kind of passion that made Marcus fall deeper in love with her every single day. "I want to tell the story of how my great-grandmother's recipes traveled from Nigeria to Alabama," she'd say, her naked body pressed against his as dawn light filtered through their bedroom curtains. "How enslaved people took ingredients from their homeland and created something entirely new with what they could find in the American South." Marcus would trace lazy circles on her bare back, listening to her dreams take shape. "That's not just a cookbook, baby. That's cultural documentation. That's preserving history through food." "Exactly." Simone would turn to face him, her eyes bright with excitement. "And Vivian understands the marketing potential. She says we can create an entire multimedia experience around it, videos showing the cooking process, interactive family trees connecting recipes to regions, even virtual cooking classes." What Simone didn't notice was how Marcus's expression would shift slightly whenever she mentioned Vivian's ideas. How his fingers would pause their gentle caressing, or how he'd suddenly need to check his phone. The three of them spent countless hours in that downtown Oakland conference room, the same space that would later become the scene of Simone's devastation. But during those early planning sessions, it felt like a sacred space where dreams were being born. "Tell us about this one," Vivian would say, pointing to one of the handwritten recipe cards Simone had spread across the mahogany table. Her voice held genuine curiosity, and Simone felt seen in a way that was both professional and deeply personal. "That's my grandmother's mac and cheese recipe," Simone would explain, her voice soft with reverence. "But I want to elevate it with aged Gouda and a touch of Berbera spice blend. The Ethiopian spice adds this incredible depth that connects to the African roots of comfort food. The story behind that fusion is what's going to make people cry happy tears," Vivian said, leaning forward with those intense gray eyes focused completely on Simone. "You're not just mixing flavors, you're reuniting separated cultures through food." Marcus watched these exchanges with what Simone interpreted as pride in his girlfriend's brilliance. She didn't recognize it as something else entirely, the look of a man watching two women connect in ways that made him feel simultaneously aroused and excluded. "What about the shrimp and grits recipe?" Marcus asked, his voice carrying an edge Simone couldn't identify. "That's going to be revolutionary," Simone said, pulling out another weathered card. "Traditional southern shrimp and grits, but I'm using Nigerian palm oil instead of butter, and adding Scotch bonnet peppers for heat. It's like my ancestors are finally having a conversation across time and space." "That's beautiful," Vivian breathed, and when she looked at Simone, there was something in her expression that went beyond professional admiration. The cookbook wasn't just a business project. It was Simone's love letter to her heritage, her family, and her own creative vision. Every recipe represented hours of experimentation in her kitchen, with Marcus as her eager taste tester and Vivian as her strategic sounding board. "Try this," Simone would say during their evening recipe development sessions, sliding a spoon of something divine between Marcus's lips. He'd close his eyes, letting the flavors dance on his tongue before pulling her close and kissing her deeply. "You're going to make people fall in love with food all over again." "That's the plan," she'd whisper against his mouth, her heart full of love for him and hope for their shared future. But even then, small cracks were beginning to form in their perfect foundation. Marcus started staying later at their improvised office space, claiming he needed to work on investor presentations and business development. "You two go ahead," he'd say when Simone suggested dinner together. "I've got some calls to make with potential West Coast distributors. Time zone differences, you know." Simone would go home alone, sometimes cooking elaborate test recipes for one, saving portions in the refrigerator for Marcus to try when he eventually made it home. She'd fall asleep in their bed, often waking to find him sliding in beside her in the early hours of the morning, smelling like coffee and something she couldn't quite identify. "How were the investor calls?" she'd murmur sleepily, curling into his warmth. "Productive," he'd answer, his voice carrying a strange tension. Vivian had some great insights about market positioning. Vivian. Always Vivian these days. Simone pushed down the small voice in her head that wondered why so many of Marcus's late-night business strategies seemed to involve their blonde business partner. The cookbook proposal presentation was scheduled for a Tuesday evening in November. Simone had spent weeks perfecting not just the recipes, but the story arc that would take readers on a journey through her family's culinary history. She'd even brought her most precious possessions, her great-grandmother's handwritten recipe cards, yellowed with age and stained with decades of cooking. "These are sacred to me," she told Marcus and Vivian as she carefully arranged the fragile cards on the conference table. "My great-grandmother couldn't read or write English well, But she wrote these recipes in a mixture of English and Igbo. They're the only things I have left of her. Vivian leaned forward, studying the cards with what appeared to be reverent fascination. The authenticity of these is incredible, Simone. Imagine the cookbook photography we could do with these as props. The juxtaposition of handwritten tradition with modern culinary innovation. They're not props, Simone said quietly, a protective edge creeping into her voice. They're family heirlooms. Of course, Vivian backtracked smoothly. I meant as inspiration for the visual storytelling. The emotional weight they carry will translate beautifully in the multimedia presentations. Marcus stood behind Simone's chair as she presented her cookbook concept, his hands resting on her shoulders in what she interpreted as supportive intimacy. She couldn't see the way his eyes kept drifting to Vivian, or how Vivian's gaze would meet his with a knowing intensity that had nothing to do with business strategy. The cookbook will be called From My Grandmother's Kitchen to Yours, a journey of flavor, family, and finding your voice, Simone announced, her voice strong with conviction. It's not just about recipes, it's about cultural preservation, family legacy, and the revolutionary act of a Black woman claiming her space in the food media landscape. It's perfect, Marcus said, squeezing her shoulders. Absolutely perfect. The market is hungry for authentic voices like yours, Vivian added. This cookbook is going to change everything for Nourish Media. For all of us. All of us. Those words would echo in Simone's mind months later when she realized that all of us had become the two of them somewhere along the way, with her relegated to the role of creative content provider rather than equal partner. But that night, riding high on the success of her presentation and the enthusiasm of her partners, Simone felt like she was exactly where she belonged. She carefully packed away her great-grandmother's recipe cards, unaware that she was also packing away the last moments of her innocence. Dinner? Marcus asked as they prepared to leave the conference room. I'm exhausted, Vivian said, stretching in a way that drew attention to her long, lean frame. I think I'll head home and start working on some preliminary marketing strategies for the cookbook launch. You sure? Marcus asked, and there was something in his tone that made Simone glance up from organizing her presentation materials. Positive. You two enjoy your evening. You've earned it after that incredible presentation. Marcus kissed Simone goodbye in the parking lot, his lips lingering on hers with what felt like genuine passion and pride. I'm so proud of you, baby. You're about to become a household name. We're about to become a household name, she corrected, the same way she always did. Right? He said, but something in his voice sounded different. We. That night, they made love with an intensity that felt like celebration and desperation all at once. Simone attributed the desperation to excitement about their shared future. She had no way of knowing it was actually Marcus's guilt about the future he was secretly planning without her. The next morning, Simone woke up alone. Marcus had left early for what he claimed was a breakfast meeting with potential investors. She made coffee for one and started developing a new recipe, a fusion of her grandmother's cornbread with Nigerian plantain that she was excited to share with her partners. She had no idea that while she was in her kitchen creating magic from love and tradition, Marcus was in a different kitchen entirely, tasting flavors that had nothing to do with food and everything to do with betrayal. The change didn't happen overnight. Betrayal rarely does. It creeps in like smoke under a door, so subtle you don't notice until the room is already filled with poison and you can barely breathe. It started with Marcus's schedule shifting in ways that seemed perfectly reasonable. Vivian wants to meet early tomorrow to discuss the digital marketing strategy, he'd say, already reaching for his keys while Simone was still in her robe, coffee mug in hand. What time? She'd ask. 7. Coffee shop near her apartment. You know how she is about getting started early. Simone didn't know how Vivian was about anything really. Their business partner remained somewhat mysterious, sharing strategic brilliance during meetings but revealing little about her personal life. Unlike Marcus, who wore his heart on his sleeve, and Simone, who shared everything from her grandmother's stories to her deepest fears, Vivian kept her cards close to her chest. Maybe I should come too, Simone suggested one morning as Marcus grabbed his jacket. It's really just technical stuff, Marcus replied quickly. ROI calculations, audience demographic analysis. You'd be bored out of your mind. He kissed her forehead, a brotherly peck that should have been her first real warning sign. When had his kisses become so polite? I'll make dinner, she called after him. That jollof rice fusion you love. Don't wait up if I'm late, he called back. You know how these strategy sessions can run long. Strategy sessions. The phrase became Marcus's favorite excuse, used so frequently that Simone started to hate the sound of it. Strategy sessions for market research. Strategy sessions for investor presentations. Strategy sessions for brand positioning. Always with Vivian. Always running late. Always leaving Simone alone with perfectly prepared meals growing cold on their dining room table. "We're building something incredible, baby," Marcus would say when he finally came home, sometimes after midnight, smelling like coffee and something else, a perfume that definitely wasn't Simone's warm vanilla scent. "These long hours are going to pay off when we launch." Simone wanted to believe him. Love has a way of making you accept explanations that logic would reject. So she threw herself deeper into recipe development, spending her lonely evenings creating culinary masterpieces that told the story of her heritage through every carefully balanced spice. She'd photograph her creations, write detailed notes about flavor profiles and cultural connections, then save portions for Marcus to try. Her refrigerator became a museum of untouched leftovers, evidence of love offerings that went unacknowledged. "Try this," she'd say when he finally made it home, reheating her latest creation while he scrolled through his phone. Delicious," he'd mumble without really tasting, his attention clearly elsewhere. "It's my take on pepper soup but with a southern twist. I added andouille sausage and served it over cornbread dumplings." "Sounds great, babe. Really innovative." But he wasn't really listening. His phone buzzed with a text message, and Simone caught a glimpse of the sender name, Vivian. At 11:47 p.m. "Work stuff?" she asked, trying to keep her voice light. Marcus's thumb moved quickly across the screen. "Just some follow-up thoughts on tomorrow's presentation." Tomorrow's presentation. There was always a tomorrow's presentation, a next week's investor meeting, a crucial deadline that required Marcus's immediate attention and took him away from their dinner table, their bed, their conversations about the future they were supposedly building together. If you've ever felt yourself becoming the third wheel in your own relationship, comment "same" below. Because sometimes the person you love most starts treating you like an interruption in their real life. The breaking point came on a Thursday evening in March. Simone had spent the entire day perfecting her grandmother's pound cake recipe, adding a touch of Nigerian palm wine to the batter that created the most incredible depth of flavor. She'd planned a romantic evening: candles, wine, the cake as dessert after Marcus's favorite dinner of braised short ribs with jollof rice risotto. Marcus walked through the door at 6:30, exactly when he'd promised to be home for their dinner date. Vivian pulled her skirt down with hands that shook, but her eyes when they met Simone's held not just shame but defiance. As if she'd been caught at something she wasn't entirely sorry about. The conference room fell deadly silent except for the sound of Simone's heart shattering into a million pieces. She stood there, still holding her phone charger, while the two people she trusted most in the world scrambled to cover up their betrayal. "How long?" The words came out of Simone's mouth like broken glass. Marcus couldn't even look at her. His hands were shaking as he tried to button his shirt. "Simone, I can explain." "How long, Marcus?" Her voice echoed off the walls, filled with a pain so raw it seemed to change the air pressure in the room. Vivian stepped forward, and there was something almost courageous about the way she met Simone's eyes. "Simone, we never meant for you to find out like this." "Don't?" Simone's voice cut through Vivian's words like a blade. "Don't you dare speak to me. You don't get to explain anything. You don't get to make this better with words." She turned back to Marcus, the man she'd loved for 5 years, the man she'd built dreams with, the man who was supposed to be her partner in everything. "How long?" Marcus's voice, when it finally came, was barely a whisper. 6 months. 6 months. The words hit Simone like a physical blow. 6 months of lies. 6 months of strategy sessions. 6 months of her cooking elaborate dinners for a man who was being fed elsewhere. 6 months of lonely nights and polite kisses and feeling like she was competing for attention in her own relationship. 6 months of her pouring her soul into recipes while Marcus was pouring his body into someone else. 6 months, she repeated, her voice strangely calm. "So when I was sharing my great-grandmother's stories with you, when I was trusting you with my family's most sacred recipes, when I was planning our future together, you were already with her." "It wasn't supposed to happen," Marcus said desperately. It started as attraction and then..." "Don't." Simone held up her hand. "Don't you dare make this sound like something that happened to you. You chose this. Every day for 6 months you chose this." She looked around the conference room at her great-grandmother's recipe cards scattered across the table where Marcus and Vivian had just been. She couldn't even finish the thought. "You didn't just break my heart," she said, her voice steady despite the earthquake splitting her chest open. "You stole my entire future. You took everything I built, everything I dreamed, everything I trusted you with, and you turned it into this. Marcus took a step toward her, his eyes filled with tears that Simone found insulting. Simone, please. I love you. What Vivian and I have, it's not love. It's just. Stop talking. Simone's voice was ice. Just stop talking before you make this worse. She walked to the conference table and began gathering her great-grandmother's recipe cards with hands that somehow remained steady. Each card felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Each yellowed page represented trust that had been violated, intimacy that had been desecrated, family legacy that had been disrespected. You're taking those? Vivian asked, and there was something in her tone that made Simone's blood boil. These are mine, Simone said without looking up. They've always been mine. They're the only things in this room that actually belong to me. She tucked the cards carefully into her purse, protecting them from any more contamination from this poison space. Simone, we need to talk about this, Marcus said. About the business, about our partnership. There is no partnership. Simone finally looked at him, and the emptiness in her eyes made him step backward. There is no us. There is no future. There's just you and her and whatever mess you've made of my company. It's not your company, Vivian said quietly. It's our company. All three of us. Simone turned to face the woman who had systematically destroyed her life while pretending to be her ally. Is it? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like it's become your company. The two of you, making decisions, having strategy sessions, building something together while I created content for you to sell. The truth of those words settled over the room like dust after an explosion. Because that's exactly what had happened. While Simone had been developing recipes and writing cultural narratives and pouring her authentic voice into their shared project, Marcus and Vivian had been building their own partnership, personal, professional, and intimate. That's not, Marcus started. Save it for your lawyers, Simone said, shouldering her purse. Because that's who you'll be talking to from now on. She walked toward the door, then stopped and turned back one more time. I hope it was worth it, she said, looking at both of them. I hope the sex was so incredible that it was worth destroying 5 years of love and 3 years of dreams and a friendship I actually believed in. Marcus was crying now, real tears streaming down his face. Simone, please. No, she said firmly. You made your choice. 6 months ago you made your choice. Every day since then you've made your choice. So live with it. She walked out of that conference room, out of that building, out of the life she'd thought was hers, and she didn't look back. But as she sat in her car in the parking lot, hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles were white, Simone allowed herself exactly 5 minutes to fall apart. 5 minutes to sob for the love she'd lost, the trust that had been shattered, the future that had been stolen from her. After 5 minutes, she wiped her tears, started her car, and drove toward what she didn't yet know would be the beginning of her greatest triumph. Because sometimes, when people steal your dreams, the universe gives you something better than you ever imagined possible. Sometimes, the worst betrayal becomes the catalyst for the most beautiful revenge. Simone just didn't know it yet. The lawyers came like vultures circling a fresh kill. 3 days after the conference room discovery, Simone received a certified letter that felt like a second betrayal. Marcus and Vivian weren't just stealing her heart and her trust. They were stealing her life's work with surgical precision and legal documents that made it all seem civilized and proper. Ms. Williams, the letter began in that cold, impersonal language that lawyers use to make cruelty sound professional. Our clients, Mr. Marcus Vale and Ms. Vivian Carrick, majority shareholders of Nourish Media LLC, are exercising their right to restructure the company's ownership and operational framework. Restructure. Such a clean word for what they were actually doing, ripping her life apart. Simone sat in her kitchen, still wearing the same clothes she'd worn to that disastrous presentation 3 days ago, reading legal language that stripped away everything she'd built. The apartment felt hollow without Marcus's presence, but she couldn't bring herself to pack his things or change the sheets that still smelled like his cologne. Her phone rang. Marcus's name on the screen made her stomach clench. Don't answer, she told herself. But her heart, stubborn and still bleeding, made her swipe to accept the call. Simone, please, we need to talk about this lawyer situation. Marcus's voice was strained, desperate. There's nothing to talk about. Your letter was very clear. It doesn't have to be like this. We can work something out, the three of us. The three of us? Simone's laugh was bitter. Marcus, there is no three of us. There never was. There was you and Vivian building something together while I provided the content. Now you're just making it official. That's not true. Your recipes, your vision, they're the heart of everything we built. They were the heart. Past tense. Because according to your lawyers, I signed agreements that give the company ownership of any recipes I developed during our partnership. The silence on Marcus's end told her everything she needed to know. He hadn't expected her to read the fine print so carefully. He'd hoped she'd just accept whatever scraps they threw her and fade quietly into the background. Simone, I never wanted it to happen like this. But you wanted it to happen. You wanted me gone so you could build your perfect little empire with Vivian without the inconvenience of the woman whose family recipes you're planning to profit from. It's not like that. It's exactly like that. Simone's voice was steady now, cold as winter morning. You're taking my grandmother's legacy and turning it into your business plan. You're stealing my voice and calling it your content. You're erasing me from my own story. She hung up and threw her phone across the kitchen, watching it skitter across the hardwood floor. The silence that followed felt like death. The legal battle that followed was swift and merciless. Marcus and Vivian had 60% ownership of Nourish Media, a detail Simone had agreed to during the early days when she was drunk on love and trust. They had expensive lawyers who specialized in intellectual property and business dissolution. They had documentation of every recipe Simone had developed, every cultural story she'd shared, every family tradition she'd trusted them with. Simone had a court-appointed attorney who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else and a heart too broken to fight effectively. The contracts are pretty ironclad, her lawyer, David Chin, told her during their consultation in his cramped downtown Oakland office. You signed work-for-hire agreements that assign ownership of any intellectual property developed during the partnership to the company. Since they have majority control. They own my grandmother's recipes. The words tasted like poison in Simone's mouth. Technically, they own the versions you adapted and the multimedia presentations you created around them. The original family recipes themselves can't be copyrighted, but your specific adaptations and the storytelling framework you built, that's considered company property. Simone stared out the grimy window at the Oakland skyline, at the city where she'd thought she was building her dream life. So they can publish my cookbook under their company name. Yes. And there's more. David's voice grew even more apologetic. They're also claiming the client list you helped develop, the brand partnerships you initiated, and the social media following you built. Everything that was created under the Nourish Media umbrella becomes theirs in the dissolution. If you've ever felt completely powerless while someone legally stole what was rightfully yours, let me know in the comments. Because sometimes the law protects the wrong people, and justice has to be served in other ways. The final insult came 2 weeks later, delivered not through lawyers but through Instagram. Simone was lying in bed at 2 a.m., unable to sleep, scrolling mindlessly through social media when she saw it. Marcus's post showed him and Vivian clinking champagne glasses in what looked like an expensive restaurant. They were both glowing with happiness, Vivian's ring finger conspicuously adorned with a diamond that caught the restaurant's mood lighting perfectly. The caption made Simone's blood turn to ice. Sometimes life gives you exactly what you need when you're brave enough to follow your heart. So grateful to have found my perfect business partner in life and love. Here's to building something beautiful together. #power couple, #Nourish Media, #new beginnings. Perfect business partner in life and love. The words were like salt in a wound that hadn't even begun to heal. But the comments were worse. Hundreds of people congratulating them, calling them couple goals, praising their authentic partnership. Food bloggers and industry contacts that Simone had cultivated, relationships she had built, all celebrating Marcus and Vivian's love story like it was something beautiful instead of something born from betrayal and theft. One comment in particular made Simone's hands shake with rage. You two are so inspiring. Can't wait to see what Nourish Media creates next. Your cookbook launch is going to be incredible. Their cookbook launch. Using her recipes, telling her stories, profiting from her family's legacy. Simone threw her phone across the room and screamed into her pillow until her throat was raw. The next morning she woke up in her cramped studio apartment in West Oakland, a far cry from the beautiful place she'd shared with Marcus. Her savings account had been drained by legal fees and the security deposit on this tiny space that was all she could afford now. Rejection letters from publishers covered her coffee table like fallen leaves. Not quite right for our list. The market is saturated with fusion cookbooks. Your voice lacks the platform necessary for commercial success. Platform. That was the word that kept appearing in every rejection. The platform she'd built under the Nourish Media brand now belonged to Marcus and Vivian. Without it, she was just another talented chef with recipes and no way to reach an audience. Simone made coffee in a kitchen so small she could touch both walls with her arms outstretched, and stared at the stack of bills she couldn't pay. Rent, utilities, student loans from culinary school, legal fees that would follow her for years. Outside her window, Oakland went about its business, indifferent to her pain. Somewhere across town, Marcus and Vivian were probably planning their future, their successful food media company, their profitable cookbook launch, their perfect life built on the foundation of her destroyed dreams. She thought about her great-grandmother's recipe cards, now safely hidden in a shoebox under her bed. They were the only things she'd managed to save from the wreckage. Everything else, her reputation, her platform, her financial security, her faith in love, had been stripped away with legal precision. But as Simone sat in that tiny kitchen, surrounded by rejection letters and unpaid bills, something began to shift inside her chest. It started as a spark of anger, then grew into a flame of determination that would soon become an inferno of purpose. Marcus and Vivian thought they had won. They thought they had taken everything that mattered. They had no idea that they had just awakened something in Simone that would make their victory taste like ashes in their mouths. The real war was about to begin. Sometimes salvation comes in the most unexpected packages. For Simone, it arrived in the form of Mrs. Chin, her 73-year-old Chinese neighbor who had a habit of appearing at exactly the right moment with exactly the right words. 3 weeks after the legal documents had stripped away everything she'd built, Simone was sitting on her fire escape at 6 a.m., still in yesterday's clothes, staring at her phone screen displaying her bank balance. $347.82. Not enough for next month's rent. Not enough for groceries. Barely enough to keep existing in this tiny apartment that felt more like a prison cell than a home. She'd been living on instant ramen and the kind of despair that makes you forget what hope feels like. Her cookbook manuscript sat untouched on her laptop, dozens of pages of cultural fusion recipes that felt meaningless now that she had no platform, no publisher, no way to share her voice with the world. The gentle knock on her door made her groan with frustration. Probably the landlord coming to discuss her upcoming rent payment that she couldn't make. But when she opened the door, Mrs. Chin stood in the hallway holding a thermal container that smelled like heaven and hope. "You look terrible, child," Mrs. Chin said in her direct way, pushing past Simone into the studio apartment. "When's the last time you ate real food?" Simone couldn't remember. Time had become meaningless in the fog of depression and rejection letters. "I brought dumplings," Mrs. Chin continued, unpacking the container with practiced efficiency. "Pork and chive. My grandmother's recipe from Guangzhou." The irony wasn't lost on Simone. Another grandmother's recipe. Another family legacy passed down through generations of women who understood that food was love made tangible. "Mrs. Chin, I appreciate this, but I'm not really hungry." "Sit." The command was gentle but non-negotiable. "Eat first. Talk after." The dumplings were perfect, delicate wrappers encasing savory filling that had been seasoned with decades of practice and love. As Simone ate, she felt something inside her chest loosen slightly. Not healing exactly, but the first suggestion that healing might be possible. "Better?" Mrs. Chin asked. Simone nodded, not trusting her voice. "Good. Now tell me what happened. And don't say nothing. I've been watching you waste away for weeks like someone stole your soul." Something about Mrs. Chen's matter-of-fact kindness broke through Simone's defenses. The story poured out, the betrayal, the legal battle, the stolen recipes, the engagement announcement, the rejection letters, the empty bank account. All of it. Mrs. Chen listened without interruption, occasionally nodding or making small sounds of disapproval when Marcus and Vivian's actions became particularly egregious. "Stupid girl," she said when Simone finished. "Excuse me? Not you. This Vivian woman. Stupid to think she can steal someone's voice and make it her own. Food doesn't work that way. Love doesn't work that way. Culture doesn't work that way." Simone felt tears threatening again. "But they have all the legal rights. They own my recipes, my platform, everything." "They own papers," Mrs. Chin said dismissively. "They don't own your hands. They don't own your grandmother's stories. They don't own your heart. That doesn't matter if I can't find a publisher. Nobody wants a cookbook from someone with no platform." Mrs. Chin was quiet for a long moment, studying Simone with eyes that had seen 8 decades of human nature in all its complexities. "My granddaughter lives in San Francisco," she said finally. "Works for small publishing house. Very smart girl, very good at seeing what others miss." Simone's heart did a small flutter, but she forced herself not to hope too much. She'd been disappointed too many times. "Mrs. Chin, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but small publishers probably can't. This one is different. They specialize in authentic voices. Stories that big publishers think won't sell because they don't understand that real always wins over fake, eventually." "I don't know." Mrs. Chin stood up with the determination of someone who had made a decision. I'm calling her tonight. You're meeting her this week. Mrs. Chin. No arguments. You want to give up? Fine. Give up after you meet with her. But don't give up before you try one more time with people who understand that your grandmother's love is worth more than their legal papers. If you've ever had someone show up in your darkest moment with exactly the help you needed, drop a heart emoji below. Because sometimes the universe sends angels in the form of neighbors who refuse to let you surrender. 2 days later, Simone found herself sitting in a small cafe in the Mission District, waiting for Diana Nakamura from Copper Canyon Press. She'd spent her last $20 on the BART fare to San Francisco and a cup of coffee she was nursing to justify taking up table space. Diana turned out to be a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and gray streaking through her black hair. She moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had spent years recognizing potential where others saw problems. Mrs. Chin told me about your situation, Diana said after they'd exchanged pleasantries. I'm sorry you're going through this. Betrayal in business is particularly cruel because it attacks both your heart and your livelihood. Thank you for meeting with me, Simone said. Though I should be honest, I don't have much to offer right now. No platform, no social media following, no industry connections that haven't already chosen sides. Diana smiled. Can I tell you what I see when I look at you? Simone nodded, though she couldn't imagine what anyone could see in her current state. I see a woman who has been through hell and is still sitting here, still fighting. I see someone who understands that food is storytelling, culture is resistance, and authenticity is revolutionary. I see a voice that the publishing world desperately needs, even if they don't know it yet. Simone felt something dangerous blooming in her chest. Hope. We're not a big publisher, Diana continued. We can't offer you the marketing budget that major houses can. We can't guarantee bestseller lists or national book tours. Simone's heart began to sink. But, Diana said, her voice growing stronger, we can offer you something more valuable. We can offer you the freedom to tell your real story. Not just recipes but memoir. Not just cooking instructions but cultural commentary. Not just a cookbook, but a manifesto about resilience, heritage, and the revolutionary act of a black woman claiming her space in a predominantly white industry. The words hit Simone like electricity. This was what she'd always wanted to do, not just share recipes but share the stories behind them, the cultural significance, the family connections that made each dish a piece of living history. We believe in authentic storytelling, Diana continued. Your cookbook won't just compete with theirs, it will make theirs look hollow and corporate by comparison. Because they might have your adapted recipes but they don't have your voice. They don't have your grandmother's stories. They don't have your truth. Simone's hands were shaking. What would you need from me? Everything. Your whole story. The love, the betrayal, the legal battle, the comeback. Frame it all around your grandmother's recipes and your cultural fusion innovations. Show readers not just how to cook but why these flavors matter, where they come from, what they represent. And you think people will want to read that? Diana leaned forward, her eyes bright with conviction. Simone, authenticity is the most powerful marketing tool in the world. People are hungry for real stories, real voices, real connections. Your ex-partners might have stolen your business platform, but they can't steal your truth. Simone thought about her great-grandmother's recipe cards, still hidden in the shoebox under her bed. She thought about the stories her grandmother had told her about flavors that connected continents and cultures. She thought about the fusion recipes she'd developed that weren't just innovative cooking but acts of cultural reclamation. When would you need the manuscript? Take your time. Get it right. This isn't about speed, it's about depth. Write the book that only you can write. Tell the story that only you can tell. That afternoon, Simone signed a contract with Copper Canyon Press. The advance wasn't huge, enough to pay rent for 6 months and buy groceries while she wrote, but it felt like winning the lottery. More importantly, it felt like getting her voice back. That night she called Mrs. Chen to thank her. Don't thank me yet, the older woman said. Thank me when your book makes those thieves regret what they stole. As Simone hung up the phone, she realized Mrs. Chen was right. This wasn't just about publishing a cookbook anymore. This was about proving that authentic voices couldn't be silenced, that stolen dreams could be rebuilt better than before, and that sometimes the people who try to destroy you end up giving you exactly the motivation you need to become unstoppable. Marcus and Vivian thought they had won by taking her platform and her recipes. They had no idea they had just handed her the greatest story she would ever tell. The transformation didn't happen overnight. Real change never does. But for the next 8 months, Simone lived and breathed her manuscript with the intensity of a woman who understood that this wasn't just a cookbook, it was her resurrection. She woke up every morning at 5 a.m. in her tiny studio apartment, made coffee in a kitchen barely large enough for one person, and sat at her second-hand desk with her great-grandmother's recipe cards spread before her like sacred texts. Each yellowed page represented not just ingredients and measurements, but generations of women who had survived, adapted, and thrived despite circumstances that tried to break them. "Tell me your secrets," she would whisper to the cards, her fingers tracing the faded handwriting that mixed English with Igbo phrases. "Tell me how to turn pain into power." The writing came in waves, sometimes flowing like honey, other times requiring her to wrestle each word onto the page. But with every sentence, Simone felt herself becoming stronger, more certain of her voice, more connected to the legacy she was carrying forward. She wrote about her great-grandmother's hands, weathered and wise, teaching a young girl the difference between cooking and creating love. She explored the brutal history of how African flavors had traveled to American soil through the violence of slavery, then transformed into something entirely new through the creativity and resilience of people who refused to let their culture die. "This jollof rice mac and cheese isn't just fusion," she typed one morning, tears mixing with coffee as she remembered sharing this recipe with Marcus for the first time. "It's revolution. It's my Nigerian ancestors speaking to my Southern grandmother across centuries of separation, creating something that honors both without betraying either." But the real magic happened when Simone decided to start sharing her journey online. She'd lost her platform with Nourish Media, but she hadn't lost her voice. Using her phone and the natural light from her tiny kitchen window, she began posting videos of herself cooking in that cramped space, talking candidly about betrayal, resilience, and the revolutionary act of reclaiming your narrative. "I'm Simone Williams," she said in her first video, standing in front of her two-burner stove while stirring a pot of her grandmother's pepper soup. "6 months ago, the man I loved and the business partner I trusted stole my recipes, my platform, and my company. They thought they could steal my voice too." She lifted a spoonful of the rich, aromatic soup and tasted it, her eyes closing with satisfaction. They were wrong. The video was raw, unpolished, filmed in a kitchen that was clearly too small for the big dreams it contained. But something about Simone's authenticity, her vulnerability combined with fierce determination, struck a chord with viewers. 50 views became 500. 500 became 5,000. "Today I'm making my great-grandmother's cornbread," she said in another video, her hands working the batter while she talked. "But I'm adding plantain flour because I believe our ancestors' ingredients should dance together, not fight. This bread represents something they tried to steal from me, the right to tell my own family's story." Each video was a small act of rebellion. Each recipe shared was proof that authentic voices couldn't be silenced by legal documents. Each story told was evidence that culture belonged to the people who lived it, not the companies that tried to package it. If you've ever had to rebuild yourself from nothing and found strength you didn't know you had, drop a phoenix emoji below. Because sometimes destruction is just preparation for your most beautiful rebirth. The breakthrough came 4 months into her writing process. Simone had posted a video making her revolutionary shrimp and grits, the one with Nigerian palm oil and Scotch bonnet peppers that represented the conversation between her ancestors across time and space. "Food is storytelling," she said to the camera, her voice steady and strong. "When someone steals your recipes, they're not just taking ingredients and measurements. They're trying to steal your family's voice, your culture's memory, your right to define yourself." The video went viral overnight. 100,000 views became 500,000. Food Network personalities started sharing it. Celebrity chefs praised her innovative approach and fearless honesty about the industry's tendency to appropriate rather than appreciate. But the comment that made Simone cry, happy tears this time, came from a young black chef in Atlanta. "Thank you for showing me that my grandmother's recipes aren't just food, they're resistance. You're teaching me to be proud of flavors I was trained to think weren't sophisticated enough." That's when Simone knew she wasn't just writing a cookbook anymore. She was starting a movement. Her social media following grew organically, authentically. No paid promotions, no marketing gimmicks, just the raw power of a woman telling her truth and connecting with people who recognized their own struggles in her story. 200,000 followers became 400,000. Food and Wine featured her in an article about voices redefining American cuisine. The James Beard Foundation invited her to speak at a symposium about cultural appropriation versus appreciation in food media. Meanwhile, across town, Nourish Media was struggling. Simone learned this not from Marcus or Vivian, she'd blocked them on all platforms, but from industry whispers and declining social media engagement on their accounts. Their cookbook, finally published 18 months after forcing Simone out, had received mediocre reviews that used words like technically proficient but soulless and lacking cultural depth. The recipes feel borrowed rather than lived, one critic wrote. There's a fundamental authenticity missing that makes the entire project feel hollow. Simone read these reviews with a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. She'd never wanted Marcus and Vivian to fail, she'd wanted them to succeed with her, building something beautiful together. But they'd chosen theft over partnership, shortcuts over authenticity, and now they were learning the harsh lesson that stolen voices never sing as sweetly as authentic ones. Her manuscript grew from 200 pages to 300, then 350. Each chapter wove together recipes with memoir, cultural history with personal healing, cooking instructions with revolutionary manifesto. Diana had been right, this wasn't just a cookbook. It was a declaration of independence. From my grandmother's kitchen to yours, a journey of flavor, family, and finding your voice became more than a title. It became a promise to readers that they would find not just recipes, but permission to claim their own stories, honor their own heritage, and resist anyone who tried to steal their authentic voice. The pre-orders started 6 months before publication. First hundreds, then thousands, then tens of thousands. Food bloggers who had never heard of Copper Canyon Press were suddenly talking about Simone's upcoming book like it was the publishing event of the year. But the sweetest moment came 8 months after she'd started writing, when Simone received a call that would change everything. "Simone," Diana's voice was barely containing excitement, "you need to sit down." "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. Everything's right. The pre-orders just hit 100,000 copies. We haven't even announced the official publication date yet." Simone sat down heavily on her tiny apartment's only chair, staring at the manuscript pages scattered across her desk. 100,000 people wanted to read her story. 100,000 people believed in her voice. "There's more," Diana continued. "Netflix wants to discuss a streaming series based on the book. And 3 major publishers are asking if we'd consider letting them distribute the paperback edition." Simone thought about Marcus and Vivian's Instagram posts celebrating their success with stolen recipes and hollow victories. She thought about the conference room where they desecrated her family's legacy. She thought about the legal documents that had tried to silence her. Then she looked at her great-grandmother's recipe cards, still spread across her desk like a blessing, and smiled. "Diana," she said, her voice steady and strong, "I think it's time to announce that publication date. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't crushing your enemies. Sometimes it's becoming so magnificently, authentically successful that their betrayal becomes irrelevant." And Simone was just getting started. The night before her book launch, Simone stood in her new apartment in Berkeley, a beautiful space with a real kitchen, large windows, and room to breathe, arranging flowers for the celebration that would change her life forever. The advance from Copper Canyon Press had allowed her to move out of that cramped studio, but more importantly, the pre-order numbers had proven that authentic voices could build audiences that corporate manipulation never could. She was folding napkins when her phone rang. Marcus's name on the screen made her stomach clench with familiar pain, but this time it was accompanied by something new, a sense of her own power. She almost didn't answer. Almost let it go to voicemail like she had for the dozens of calls over the past months. But something told her this call would be different. "Simone." His voice cracked when she picked up. Thank you for answering. What do you want, Marcus?" The silence stretched between them like a chasm filled with everything they destroyed and everything they could never rebuild. "I made a mistake," he said finally. "The biggest mistake of my life." Simone continued folding napkins, her hands steady now in ways they hadn't been a year ago. "You made several mistakes. Which one specifically are you referring to?" "Letting you go. Choosing," he couldn't say Vivian's name. "Choosing what I thought was easier instead of fighting for what was real." "What was real, Marcus?" Another silence, longer this time. Through her window, Simone could see the bay sparkling under city lights. Tomorrow, hundreds of people would celebrate her book launch at an event that Food and Wine was covering. Tomorrow, her truth would officially be available to the world. "You were real," he whispered. "We were real. Your dreams, your recipes, your vision for the company, that was the only real thing we had." Simone closed her eyes, remembering the man she'd fallen in love with 7 years ago. The one who'd supported her culinary dreams, who'd held her when she cried after her grandmother's funeral, who'd believed in their shared vision before Vivian's winter storm eyes had clouded his judgment. "I know," she said softly. "But real wasn't enough for you then. And it's too late now." Simone, please. I have to go, Marcus. Tomorrow's a big day. She hung up and returned to her preparations, her hands steady as she arranged flowers for the launch party that would change her life forever. From my grandmother's kitchen to yours, a journey of flavor, family, and finding your voice, debuted at number 3 on the New York Times bestseller list. Simone was in her new test kitchen, a beautiful converted space in Oakland's Arts District that she'd rented with her advance money, when Diana called with the news. 3? Simone repeated, barely believing the words. 3. Behind a celebrity memoir and a political exposé. But Simone, the trajectory is incredible. Pre-orders are still pouring in and the reviews. Diana's voice grew emotional. The Washington Post called it a masterpiece of culinary memoir that redefines what American food storytelling can be. The reviews had been overwhelming. The New York Times praised her fearless vulnerability and revolutionary approach to cultural fusion. Food and Wine declared it essential reading for anyone who wants to understand how food becomes resistance. But the review that made Simone cry came from a small food blog run by a young Latina chef. Simone Williams has given us permission to be proud of our grandmother's recipes and our own adaptations of them. This book isn't just about cooking, it's about cultural survival. Within a month, the book had climbed to number 1, where it stayed for 12 consecutive weeks. The accompanying Netflix series featuring Simone cooking in locations that traced her family's journey from Nigeria to Alabama to California was picked up for 2 seasons before the first episode even aired. Her speaking fees quadrupled overnight. Corporations that had never heard of her were offering endorsement deals. Celebrity chefs who had ignored her during the Nourish Media days were suddenly sliding into her DMs with collaboration proposals. But the sweetest validation came from an unexpected source. Simone was developing recipes for her second cookbook when she received a call from her lawyer, not the overworked court-appointed attorney from her legal battle, but the entertainment lawyer she could now afford. "Simone," he said, barely containing his excitement, "you're going to want to sit down for this. Good news or bad news? Depends on your perspective. Nourish Media is filing for bankruptcy." The words hit Simone like a wave of vindication and sadness all at once. She'd spent so many months dreaming of this moment, but now that it was here, she felt more empty than triumphant. "Marcus Vail and Vivian Carrick are liquidating all assets," her lawyer continued. "They want to know if you're interested in purchasing the company name and client list." Simone was standing in her test kitchen, sunlight streaming through industrial windows, surrounded by herbs growing on every available surface. The space smelled like possibility and redemption. On her windowsill sat a framed photo of her grandmother, whose eyes seemed to twinkle with mischief. "What's their asking price?" she asked, though she already knew she could afford whatever they named. When he told her, she laughed, not from cruelty but from the pure irony of it all. The amount was exactly what she'd earned from her first month of cookbook sales. 1 month of authentic success equaled everything they'd tried to build on stolen foundations. "Tell them I'll think about it," she said. That evening she called Aunt Jewel, her grandmother's sister who had helped raise her after her parents died. The family matriarch's voice was warm with pride. "Baby girl, your grandmother would be so proud. Not just of your success but of how you handled yourself. You could have been bitter, could have let that betrayal poison your heart. Instead, you turned it into something beautiful. I'm thinking about buying the company, Aunt Jewel. Starting over with my own vision. What does your heart tell you?" Simone looked around her test kitchen, then at the framed photo of her grandmother on the windowsill. The old woman's eyes seemed to twinkle with mischief and wisdom. "My heart says some recipes are worth perfecting, but some ingredients are just too rotten to save." The next morning she called her lawyer back. "Tell Marcus and Vivian thank you for the offer, but I'm building something better." 6 months later, Simone launched Roots and Branches Media from her Oakland headquarters, a beautiful converted warehouse space that buzzed with creative energy and authentic voices. Her mission statement was simple but revolutionary: elevating diverse voices in food media while honoring the cultural traditions that make us who we are. Her first signing was a young Latina chef from East LA who'd been rejected by every major publisher because her recipes were too ethnic. Her second was a black farmer from Mississippi who wanted to document the connection between soil and soul food. Her third was a Korean-American baker whose grandmother's techniques had been dismissed as not commercial enough by traditional publishing houses. "We're not just publishing cookbooks," Simone told the reporter from Forbes who was profiling her meteoric rise. "We're preserving cultural memories, amplifying silenced voices, and proving that authenticity sells better than appropriation." On the 1-year anniversary of her cookbook launch, Simone hosted a celebration at her headquarters. The guest list included James Beard Award winners, Netflix executives, Food Network personalities, and 3 generations of her own family who'd driven from Alabama to be there. Marcus wasn't invited, but she spotted him across the street as guests arrived, standing beside a black sedan like a ghost haunting his own funeral. Their eyes met through the window. He raised his hand, not quite a wave, more like a surrender. She nodded once, then turned back to her guests, to her life, to the future she'd built from the ashes of betrayal. Later that night, as she cleaned up with help from her team, her chosen family of creative collaborators who understood that the best businesses, like the best recipes, are built on trust, respect, and shared vision, Simone reflected on the strange alchemy of heartbreak and triumph. She'd learned that some losses are actually gains in disguise, that being forced to rebuild from nothing can teach you exactly what you're made of, and that the sweetest revenge isn't crushing your enemies, it's becoming so magnificently, authentically yourself that their betrayal becomes irrelevant. Her phone buzzed with a text from Diana. Pre-orders for cookbook number 2 just hit 100K. The publishing world is officially your oyster. Simone smiled, thinking of her grandmother's hands guiding her through that first cornbread recipe all those years ago. Add love to everything you make, the old woman had said. Even when your heart is broken, especially then. Love is the secret ingredient that makes everything else possible. She'd been right as always. Simone had added love for her craft, her culture, her story, and ultimately herself. And that love had transformed betrayal into bestsellers, heartbreak into healing, and the end of one dream into the beginning of something far more beautiful. Outside, Oakland sparkled with possibility, and in her test kitchen, tomorrow's recipes waited to be born. 5 years later, Simone Rochelle Williams stood in the same conference room where her heart had been shattered, where her trust had been violated, where her dreams had been stolen. But this time, she wasn't the broken woman who had discovered betrayal on that mahogany table. She was the CEO of a multimillion-dollar media empire, the best-selling author of 3 cookbooks, and the voice that had revolutionized how America thought about cultural fusion and authentic storytelling. Nourish Media's old building had been renovated and renamed. The conference room was now part of a community culinary center that Simone had funded, a place where young chefs from diverse backgrounds could learn not just cooking techniques, but how to protect their voices, their recipes, and their cultural heritage from those who would steal rather than celebrate. Full circle, she murmured to herself, running her fingers along the same table where Marcus and Vivian had betrayed her, where she'd left her great-grandmother's recipe cards scattered like forgotten prayers. Today that table held something different: contracts for her 4th cookbook, licensing agreements for her upcoming restaurant chain, and partnership proposals from networks who wanted to work with the woman who had proven that authenticity could build empires better than appropriation ever could. Her phone buzzed with a text from Diana, now her business partner as well as her publisher. The documentary about your journey just got picked up by HBO. They're calling it, The Recipe for Resilience: How One Woman Turned Betrayal into a Media Empire. Simone smiled, thinking about how that broken-hearted woman from 5 years ago could never have imagined this moment. That woman had believed her worth was tied to Marcus's love, her success dependent on their partnership, her voice valuable only when amplified by their platform. She'd been wrong about all of it. The real lesson wasn't about revenge, though the satisfaction of watching Marcus and Vivian's stolen empire crumble had been sweet. The real lesson was about understanding that when someone tries to steal your voice, your culture, your dreams, they can only succeed if you let them. Marcus and Vivian had taken her recipes, but they couldn't take her grandmother's stories. They'd stolen her platform, but they couldn't steal her authenticity. They'd broken her heart, but they'd also freed her to build something infinitely more beautiful than anything she could have created while settling for their version of success. As Simone left that conference room for the final time, she thought about the woman she'd been 5 years ago, heartbroken, legally powerless, financially devastated, convinced her story was over. That woman could never have imagined this triumph, this peace, this sense of coming home to herself. But perhaps that woman's pain had been necessary. Perhaps you have to lose yourself completely before you can find out who you really are. Perhaps the people who try to steal your dreams are actually giving you the greatest gift possible, the motivation to build something so authentically yours that it can never be taken away. The last text message Simone received that day came from Mrs. Chen, now 81 and still dispensing wisdom with dumplings. Proud of you, child. Your grandmother's spirit is dancing in heaven. You took her recipes and turned them into revolution. Revolution. That's exactly what it had been. Not just a personal comeback, but a complete transformation of how she understood her own power, her own worth, her own capacity for creating something beautiful from the ashes of something broken. And if you're watching this story thinking about your own betrayals, your own stolen dreams, your own moments when someone tried to silence your authentic voice, remember this. Your story isn't over. Your best recipes are still waiting to be created. Your most powerful voice is still waiting to be heard. The people who try to steal from you today are simply giving you tomorrow's motivation to build something they could never imagine, something so authentically yours that it makes their theft look like the desperate act of people who never understood what real success looks like. Because real success tastes like your grandmother's love, sounds like your authentic voice, and feels like coming home to yourself after a long journey through other people's versions of who you should be. And that, beautiful souls, is a recipe no one can ever steal. Thank you for joining me on this incredible journey of love, betrayal, and ultimate triumph. If Simone's story has inspired you, share it with someone who needs to remember their own power. Like this video if you believe in the magic of authentic success. Subscribe for more stories that prove love in all its forms always wins in the end. Until next time, keep cooking up your dreams and never let anyone convince you that their version of your story is better than your own truth. This is Mr. Ashbourne Golden Narratives, where every ending is really a beautiful beginning.